Finance meeting, May 14th, 2019. Can I get an approval of the agenda?
I have a motion moved by Councillor Dennis Perrier, seconded by Councillor Rick Owen. The council approves the agenda for its finance meeting of May 14th, 2019 as presented.
All in favor? Passed. Declaration of pecuniary interest.
Yeah, I have a declaration of pecuniary interest on item 4.1a. My wife and son draw their income from the Waterworks Department, so that's a conflict for me.
Thank you. Petitions, delegations? None. Proposed 2019 capital budget. Wilf.
It's been a long time coming, but I'm hopefully we're beginning to see where the turn in the road is and start making our way towards that. On the capital budget, it's an A list of items pertaining to equipment, facilities, and infrastructure. As usual, staff recommends, council decides. Tonight, we are asking council for direction, if not on the capital budget as a whole, then on single line items. Do you accept, approve them, or not? And that's why we do have the staff here to answer questions. Whatever you direct, we will update and bring back that capital budget in the future. There is a monkey in the room. There are funded projects. These are usually infrastructure ones. Unfortunately, with the provincial government change, we don't have all the approvals in place yet. To be accurate, we have to bring them forward to you for consideration as part of the capital. They can change the dollar numbers significantly. We will explain what they are, and we are asking again, do you think that they are to the value of the community? Do you wish for us to proceed? Where we could, we tried to put together recommendations as well as what the pros and the cons are. There are considerations that you should take into account. You can say no. We have made do for an awful long time, and if things, we can make do again. If something goes south, we're not afraid to come back to council and say, no, we got a problem. This is an emergency amendment to the capital budget. Okay, that it sounds like it's management by not managing, but that's life, and that's an option. You're 6 months in. June is around the corner, sadly. You have the right to ask, what items on this budget can you actually defer to 2020? Maybe none. Staff will tell you, but that's your decision. You should, could, maybe want to consider, and Sherry, please don't get angry at me, loan, debentures. Is it thematic? Are you looking for a loan or debenture for water? Or are you looking for infrastructure? Is it general? Is it worthwhile? Is it something we can do? We have to balance it against our borrowing capacity. Flip side, though, is that it may make it easier to set your user fees because you know what you're paying out. Just a suggestion. I'm certainly not trying to tell anybody what to do, and I feel for you because you've walked into a budget that is the first can or kick at the can of correcting 20 years of neglect in some areas. But we put forward our best effort. I'm sure that the staff can answer whatever questions. Jerry, as you know, is not at all adverse to telling you which way is up. We'll do the best as we can. We'll take it open. Sherry, can you come up to the table, please? It's difficult to see, but you do have it on the screen. I could be talking for quite a while and not getting to what you need or want to know. So I'd prefer to turn it over to council at this point to ask questions that we can answer as we're going through.
Okay, so the second line item is Active Directory server replacement. This wasn't on our preliminary or secondary that I could see. Is it the same as replace main Active Directory DNS server at KDH.
Peter, if you want to come up.
So that was completed in 2018 for $4,869.13. It was under budget by 131. So is that the same thing?
No.
Okay.
Well, it's the same type of equipment, but we do have two of them. One at KDH, which we replaced last year. This one is at Town Hall. So it is a different piece of equipment, just different location.
Okay, so why did it come up in third round budget talks? Like, wasn't, because it wasn't, I didn't see it on the other two.
I believe
I think it was on, yeah.
I believe it was at the get-go. Oh, no worries. Yeah.
Go ahead.
In one of the budget meetings with physical services, it was mentioned that the snow blower could have been the option of just refurbishing it instead of replacing it outright was something that might be viable and more beneficial for the town. Is that like, I don't see it here, I still see it as a brand new snow blower, so is that still an option, or?
Yes, it is. Steve, if you still have a voice, and Don, if you want to come up, just to address that. Steve is battling the cold that's going around, so bear with him.
Yeah, I reconfirmed some of the numbers with RPM Tech, and I wrote up something. It's in the approximate value of $90,000. That would redo the old one to like new condition. It would be sandblasted, repainted. The frame would be reworked. All the chutes, that the wear parts, high wear area parts would be replaced. The engine only has 1,400 hours on it, so we would be doing what they call an in-frame on that. So you roll in injectors and bearings in the bottom to extend its life, and then the transmission would be rebuilt. The complete hydraulic hoses, all the hydraulic system would be replaced. The electronics would be replaced. So it's essentially a new machine, but improved because the frame would be beefed up, and there would be some more wear parts put on the bottom of it for curb running.
And it would still meet your needs, though?
It would exceed it actually a little bit. It's actually the design. What I've asked for is something that they liken to a tank. But the salesman that I was speaking to, that when they did the demonstration with the new LM220, he said it won't last as long as your old one. And he says if you buy the new one, you'll be replacing it about 3 or 4 years earlier. It's 1,000 pounds lighter than the one we have now, and he recommended that we rebuild.
And how long would
the
that
old
last?
one.
So the refurbish was 90,000, that's Steve?
That's correct, and the budget base price for a new one is 150,000, and it goes up from there. There's the 175,000 was mentioned. That's because if we bought a new one, we would have to buy a new Craig adapter plate. We'd have to buy the Bluetooth adapter, the Bluetooth system for control, and there was one other item there that we had to add as well to make it work fit. Oh, the wear bars on the bottom. I'm sorry.
Okay, Rick, go ahead.
Okay, I have a couple of questions about the snow blower. On the rebuilt one, what is the company saying would be the life of the rebuild? And on the new one, what is the expected life of a new snow blower?
The rebuilt one would last probably a year or two longer than the new one, where you're looking at anywhere between 4 to 6 years before we have to do any major work on it. And the new one would probably be about in the 4-year range, because the way we do our snow removal, which is normal, we're not the only ones that do it that way. The new one would not stand up. It's 1,000 pounds lighter than the old one.
Well, 1,000 pounds lighter doesn't necessarily mean weaker when you're talking about steel.
Yes, it does. That's,
Well,
the
it
design
depends.
the design is weaker. There's 1,000 pounds less steel in the new one than the old one. So that
Yeah,
means
less
even with-
steel, but you can have stronger steel that weighs less.
according to, well, I'm just saying what the salesman told me was that it won't stand up.
Did he
as
give you
well.
the specs on the steel that's used in both machines?
No, sir, he didn't.
And Steve, in terms of operating costs, if the lighter one, obviously they made a lighter for fuel efficiencies and all that, did they ever give you any kind of indication as to what kind of efficiencies you're looking at over the old one? And is that a worthwhile consideration in terms of what the job has to be done?
As far as the efficiencies goes, the new one has a Tier 4 engine in it, which has it has a lot more sensors in it. It has more horsepower, but it has less output torque than our old one. He also recommended that we stay with the old one for that reason. The new one has a belt drive on it. Ours has a chain drive. It's a little more robust, again, from that standpoint. And as far as fuel economy goes, they're pretty close to the same, but we'll be having a lot more operational problems with the Tier 4 engine.
And it's 90,000 less.
Approximately 50 to, yeah,
Well, you said-
approximately 50
I see
less, yeah.
180,000 on here and
Right, if-
90,000 for a refurbish.
Again, it depends on the final numbers for what the Craig plate's gonna come in at and what the rest of it is, but yeah.
Okay.
What about parts for replacement or so on the old one? If it's all fixed up, you're still able to get parts, whatever you need?
They still manufacture, they stopped manufacturing that model last year.
Okay.
So there's a parts availability, we can look 10 years ahead with no problem.
Okay. One of the comments, I'm stealing some of Sherry's thunder, when you're quoting the prices, can you please make sure that you are including the full total price? And so any kind of additions, as well as the shipping and, the floating and whatever taxation and all that, make sure that you give Sherry those full prices when the list is updated, please.
Absolutely.
And Sherry, go.
I was just gonna say, and any installation costs as well, whether that's our staff or the staff, from the vendor where we're buying it, like if there's installation and they come and if there's travel costs for them to come, make sure everything is included just so that we can budget
Yeah,
accordingly.
Okay.
floating costs, transportation costs, the whole kit and caboodle, you're right. Patrick?
So, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, the blower is attached to the loader.
That's correct.
Now, the loader has to be replaced as well.
That's, yes, it should be.
What year is it?
2009.
What a rebuild on that as well?
The rebuild, I was unable to get those numbers, complete numbers for you, for this council meeting, but I asked Nortrax, because it's a 644 model. They do have a rebuild program for those as well, where they will change out the rear ends, the transmission, the engine, and the electronics. And roughly speaking, they were looking at about, well, he said anywhere between 75 to 85% of a new model. So we're probably looking at the $330,000 mark for a rebuild.
Rebuild.
Ours rebuilt, yes. Instead of a new one at approximately 410.
Okay, was that, I think we had asked you this during the budget or finance meetings, if there was a choice between the grader and the loader. You said the loader should be the first priority and the grader should be could wait a year? Is that what I understood?
Yes, that was.
Is that what you
We went back through it, and the engine on the back, or the loader, I'm sorry, has reached 15,000 hours. It's critical right
And
now.
and the grader?
The grader's hours are less, but it's obsolete as it stands now. Volvo is not making the grader any longer. They quit making them. So, and it's also 13 years old. It's going to be getting difficult to get parts for.
So can you
Going
defer
ahead.
that for a year, or can you not?
We could defer the grader for a year if need be.
Okay. Rick?
Yeah, my problem is, and it's not a case of need, when I add up these requests, it comes out to about $2 million. And that's a big problem for me. I asked, probably more than a month ago, for the repair records on all this equipment, and I never received it. So now I'm sitting in a council chamber, a council chair, and I'm being asked to make a decision on very expensive items, and I wasn't given the background information, which is a problem for me. I also know in my workplace, when I worked, in fact, in a number of my workplaces where I worked, there were often things that we wanted that would improve our ability to do our jobs, but we didn't always get them. In fact, when I was in manufacturing in a factory, the only time we got new equipment was when our parent company in the States got new equipment and we got shipped their old one. We could still do the job. So I don't know how I'm supposed to make a decision without the repair records, and not just the costs, what the repairs were, because that makes a big difference too. Hydraulic hoses go, we know that. It puts your machine down. They're high pressure systems. But that's part of the normal thing. If you're blowing a head gasket or you got a crack in your block, that's totally different in terms of where I'm coming from. But I don't have that information, and I don't understand why I don't have that information, because it's not like this is the first time I asked for it.
No, your request did come in, it was forwarded on, and a number of times I asked for clarification to get the past records. I will do what I'm supposed to do. I will defend my staff and say that they have been particularly busy. They tried to go through the accounts themselves, the accounts payable. That added frustration to it. The numbers are in place now, and we will be able to give them to you. I think that I'll take the blame that I did not ride him hard enough to get it.
Further to that, normally in fleet management, you have a logbook for each piece of equipment. And when that equipment goes in for repair, the date is noted, the problem's noted, the fix is noted, the cost is noted, the mileage or the number of hours, depending on the machine, is noted in that book. So, assuming that we're managing our fleet the way that is the industry standard, I still don't understand why that wasn't easy information to answer a counselor's request so I could make a decision based on facts and
Steve?
not wants.
Steve, can you comment on the logbook?
Fleet harmony program that we have, we don't have the staff to enter all the information that council's looking for, because we only have 2 mechanics, and with the equipment condition that it is required, that most of the time is required to do repairs, not paperwork. The paperwork that you speak of, the fleet management paperwork is done on card in the office. And in fact, that information is available for you to look at.
Where is it? I mean, I'm not trying
There
to
you go.
pick on anybody, but we're talking $2 million of ratepayers' money here, okay? We're not talking $5 or $10. We're talking $2 million, and we know that our finances are extremely tight. And I went through the proper channels to make the requests. I've been polite, I've been patient. Now I'm being asked to make a decision, and I don't have the information to make it. And the budget's so far behind, like, it's just mind-boggling to me.
Have anything? We have the documentation now. We will share it.
Patrick?
Ashley? Sorry.
Yeah, so in the multi-year budget actual that was provided to us, so I'm looking at the 2010 cat loader, so in 2018, it cost 23,000, in 2017, it cost 25,000, so is that kind of what you're looking for, Rick?
I was looking for what's in the logs. I was looking for the type of repair, the amount it costs, how often it's done, and to me, like, if we're doing a normal fleet management system, which I think is industry standards to my knowledge, that should have, not taken all that length of time. And because it's not, I want to know the type of repair too, because the type of repair can have a lot to do with whether or not the machine needs replaced. For example, my car is in getting a repair now. I was hoping it was a sensor and not the whole computer. It turned out to be the sensor, so it's worth getting fixed, right? I don't know what it's going to cost me, but if it had been the whole computer, the age and mileage makes it not fixable. So I need the details to make a decision.
Steve?
If I could answer that, perhaps we don't have all the information again. We don't have the staff to input the information to make the access as easy as it should. And I didn't do, the work that I did in a bubble. I consulted with the mechanics, and they were the ones that suggested that the equipment is in the shape that it's in. It's rough, and it needs to be replaced. So I did this in consultation with staff, other staff members, my mechanics, as well as with industry standards, and as well as other municipalities, how long they keep their equipment for. And that information, I believe, was passed on, but I'm not quite sure.
I don't think that there's a doubt that you've reported it accurately as to what it needs to be replaced and repaired. I think it's the background information that the councillor is looking for that we fell down on. We will get that to you. It came in this afternoon. It's obviously not prepared, right? Okay, so I can send that out to you tomorrow morning.
Rick?
Okay, I'm satisfied with that, but I am frustrated. I'm not angry with any staff members, and I'm not saying anybody's not doing the job. I'm just frustrated from a counselor's point of view. So I want the staff to understand, I'm not upset with anybody on staff. And being a new counselor, maybe it's a question you never got in the past, so it may have thrown you. But also, okay, all these figures here are to purchase. What about leasing? And none of these figures here show what we're gonna get. I assume we're trading in our current equipment. I don't see, well, you can correct me, it may be already in there. It may already be in the price, I don't know, but if it is, because I know there is trade-in value for our equipment, which would bring down, well, on the books, that it'd still be 2 million, but we'd have offsetting funds coming in. But also, did we look into leasing? Why did we decide to go purchase?
I can answer that. We have not decided to go purchase. We gave you these numbers for the comparative purpose of what that machine is worth.
Okay.
We would be looking at leasing. We would be looking at loans, debenture, and we would prefer that, does council agree with which ones they want to replace? Then let's find the exact model that it is that we would be replacing it with and get an accurate pricing on that. Otherwise, we're comparing 3 or 4 different lease things. We're just wasting our time.
Yeah. Okay, the other thing is we have 2 backhoes. So replacing a backhoe to me would be probably a lower priority, because if one goes down, we have the other one to use. They have about the same hours on them. I know one's older than the other. But in terms of backup, now, I know you're probably going to say we need 2 backhoes to do the job. And I'm not going to argue with you. I assume that's why you have 2. But just from a practical point of view, if the grader goes down, we don't have a backup grader, right? If the loader goes down, well, we in theory have one out at the airport, but it's not as big and it's not really suited. At least with the backhoe, even though it would mean jobs would get done slower, we do have a backup machine. So I'm kind of leaning towards not buying or not recommending buying the backhoe this year and hoping that the 2 we have could get us through. And I think what was mentioned earlier at the budget meetings, when we asked you about what was a higher priority, the loader or the grader, you said the loader. And so I'm kind of, because of the total amount, like I want to give you the tools to do your job right. But I can't write the town a $2 million check so it doesn't impact on you know. So we have to make some hard decisions. So I would recommend the loader over the grader. And then next year, in next year's budget, look at the grader and the backhoe. I mean, we have to replace them sometime, but it's a big hit in one budget. So that would be my recommendation.
Counselor, to be fair, could Steve just comment on the backhoe from your perspective?
Rick?
But you see, that's where the information I requested would be really helpful to me right now, because I don't believe in shelf life. I don't believe in life expectancy. I don't believe it when someone says a part should last 12 years and we're in the 12th year and it's still working, but we better replace it, okay? And that's part of the reason that I requested the information, so I could see if in fact it's costing us so much to have a reasonable expectation that we're gonna have to rebuild the motor. So, if that helps explain why I'm being so, I don't mean to be pushy but
Steve, could it last till January? It might not, yeah.
If I may say, like, all these pieces of equipment, it's, yes, it is, yeah. You know, we're hoping that they're going to last, of course. But they are in dire needs of each equipment that we're requesting. We're not just requesting them because we want to. It's a necessity to keep our operations going and to maintain our roads and services, so. I just wanted to add that.
And I don't agree that you have to look at all the work that's been done on a piece of equipment, because when the motor goes, transmission goes, and the thing falls apart, that wouldn't be showing on any current records. It would be showing on, I mean, you're trying to look into the future and see how things will last. And I understand when you say things are at the end of its life, that's where it is. And you know, I mean, just because something hasn't broken down last year doesn't mean it won't break down next year. So, you know, if it's in dire need of being replaced, then we should know that. That should be marked down as a priority item for us as counselors, so we understand that it's a priority item and that it should be replaced. But so we should know that the hours on the machine and why you're recommending that it be replaced. So you know, having told us that both those backhoes are in at the end of their life is an interesting detail. Yes,
So just out of curiosity, maybe because I'm new at this, but so what do we do? Do we have to give them direction right away? Like, are we picking any, meeny, miny, mo, and we're picking which one we're fixing or buying, or what's the procedure here?
So from what I understand is things like that we agree upon, Sherry will put them into the budget, and then we'll come back with a number. Those numbers are the ones that we will look at and say, hey, this means there's going to be a 5% increase in taxes in Kirkland Lake. We can then choose to remove some of those items from the budget, except for things that actually, if you sign a contract with a company for the work that's going to happen for Kirkland Lake Gold, if you sign a contract for $800,000, you can't go back on it. If you sign a contract to fix Main Street, you're pretty much caught with that contract. You can't go back and say, I'm going to pull it out of the budget. Now, if you say, we're going to get a backhoe, and something happens, you will have the option of going back and saying, listen, can you stretch that backhoe for one more year? Or can you look at another option, leasing or renting?
But deep down, we have to give them, like, we have to decide, like, right now, I'm assuming, unless, correct me if I'm
Sherry
wrong.
can't do her work without us telling her
Yeah,
what
so we have to
what
tell
the
them
numbers
right now,
are.
okay, are we going grader, loader, or kibosh?
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so Sherry can't plunk those numbers into any kind of a budget and tell us where we're gonna be.
Yeah, because we can't.
We
defer
could come
this
back and say,
anymore.
look, you know what, all departments cut your budget by 10%, and let them plunk away at that if that's what we somehow decide. Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, Eugene, I think the difficult part is that you've got, not you, but, we've got almost $7 million in, capital, projects. And they all can't be priority one because we don't have $7 million to begin with. So whether some of these would be easier, I think, in the process, what's priority 1, 2, and 3? And we obviously have to look after number ones first.
Exactly.
This just makes it more difficult, I think, and that's why Rick's asking more questions too. Just,
We could take you through line by line, but I think that you really should be going through the entire thing first and then coming back to it, because otherwise you just can't make a decision, yeah.
Go
I'm
ahead,
just a
Dennis.
little bit curious with the SCADA system that originally started off at 633,000. And now, not that I'd be complaining if it was right, but it says 107,000.
Yeah, year one of two.
101.
Yeah.
So was that saying we're still gonna spend the 600,000?
Next year.
So this is a done deal that we're going with the SCADA system without looking at anything else?
No, that's absolutely wrong,
Okay,
absolutely wrong.
that's what I'm
Yeah,
asking.
the $600,000 was inclusive of other elements of the plant that would have to be changed or adjusted to work with a new SCADA system. In the $101,000, I think that is most of the stuff that would be required at this point before you start implementing it. It would cover water flow, I always get this wrong, my apologies. A water flow. Well, see, you're putting the verb in front of the other thing there, so. It would also include the narrative to go out and to put an RFP together for us to purchase a SCADA system. It's not buying it. So you would be coming back next year with other aspects of it. I think that the overall price that he first thought of $600,000 also came down to $400,000 because they're taking some parts that they have and repurposing them as well. But it is absolutely not buying a SCADA system without going out to a tender. It is not that.
That's good. Hey, thank you, that's just what I wanted to know, thank you.
Stacy?
So I just have questions about, the 3/4 ton truck and the 1/2 ton truck.
Are you talking waterworks?
Number 5.
Yes.
Okay, forget that. I will defer it until after.
No, you can discuss it now and I'll leave.
No,
Okay.
fine.
Patrick?
For the items in public works, so for like loader, grader, backhoe, I know we're kind of discussing what's priority, but something for what's not deemed priority, I don't want to put that off and then have another $381,000 surprise next year. But if it's possible for what we do put off to have like a multi-year kind of budget laid out, right? So that way the hit's not as bad. Certainly it can work towards, but whatever the priorities are for that one, but whatever's not decided, hopefully we can still have a way to budget over multiple years to get us in a more comfortable spot.
That is where we want to be, and that's actually, not making excuses, was one of the reasons that you didn't get the information you wanted, because we tried to pull it in from everybody, complex, cemetery, airport, everything, and it's in different formats. That is a hindrance. We want to bring it all back into one. Do we want to get to a new fleet management software? I'm not willing to put that into this budget at this point. I think that there's a lot of stuff that we can still do. It might mean that we have to hire a person over at the garage to get everything up to date. But reality is, and I think the counselor's alluding to it, we have a lot of inefficiencies, and we need to identify them as we're going along and trying to correct them. There's another one further down the list on the mechanics diagnostic computer, right? Really, that's almost simple to say you can do without. The problem is, you do without, and it's costing you 3 or 4 times for each vehicle to go back and forth. So that's another one of those efficiencies. But the overall, if we can identify what we need to do, how we want to do it, then we can get to that point that you're talking about. It's not just the vehicles, it's the facilities as well, everything like that, but it's bigger than what we are able to handle right now. That's the goal.
Patrick?
So for garage lighting for 10,000, are we like going to LEDs or what's the plan on that?
With the previous administration, my plan was to slowly replace all the ballasted fluorescent lights in the garage and go to LED. It's more efficient, produces more light, and saves money. I also was instrumental in doing LED lighting in the office. Hydro One put out had a plan that they would send you bulbs for free. We got approximately $1,900 bulbs bulbs for free, and those were replacing, and the yearly savings on power just for the office alone was $1,400.
No, I certainly amend that. Looking at service delivery reviews of other municipalities, the number one recommendation is to look at power reduction, because that's a fixed cost, that's hard to do, so over 10,000. The one thing I couldn't find in the budget for the multi-year, I know I had asked but didn't get a response either, was where would I find the public works, like, maintenance cost of the building itself? So I could find it for TPR, I could find it for all the other buildings, I just couldn't find it for public works.
I think that that's, come on up, Ashley. It's actually in the account generals that we handed out, but I think that is combined with the garage as well. I think that's why it looks a little skewed.
It's not combined, it's
It's not
separate.
combined?
No, the physical services has its own building, and then there's,
sorry.
there's account number specifically for that under, the public works accounts. And then there's one for the garage, there's one for, separate for all the buildings, isn't it? Yeah.
I recall that it
I
did
can-
come up for discussion during the
312?
budget
313?
deliberations itself, but it wasn't communicated back.
313 is the mechanic shop.
Yeah.
And the garage, 314
311,
is the carpenter
312.
shop.
That's Greek to him.
Sorry.
Yeah.
14311.
We will print that off for you and get it to
That's the
you.
account numbers.
No, because just at what was available through the multi-year operating budget, I think I have this thing on my screen, it was like $1.1 million as a fixed expense of all our buildings that we're paying, which is hard to get down. So when you make these small investments, you can chip that down little by little. So I'm in support of redoing the lights to make sure the energy goes down. That's where I stand.
Rick?
Yeah, on the parking lot gravel for 2224 Government Road, which is the
New
old
parking lot.
Woolworths building that we just passed to make into a parking lot. I parked there on the weekend, and there's a fine granular packed material there already. It's a very smooth surface, it's a very hard surface. And I wish my driveway was half as good as that parking lot. So I don't think we need it there. And in further separate discussions with Joanne informed me that she has three the cement flower, what do you call them? Planters. And one park bench, which would serve as the barrier to keep cars from going through to Government Road. So I would recommend that we just take that $8,000 right off, because yes, there's going to be additional maintenance costs down the road, but what I see and what I've experienced, and I went by again yesterday just to double check to make sure that I wasn't dreaming on a pink cloud or something, and it seemed to be, and people are parking there, so.
Go for it.
Sorry. The reason why I asked for that amount of money was the planters and benches are certainly one way of deterring traffic from going through, but I'm always cognizant of the fact that perhaps somebody could maybe step on the gas instead of stepping on the brake when they're parking. It has happened in the past, and benches and park planters aren't very robust for preventing people from running over people on the sidewalk. That's where that figure came from, as well as any other physical barriers that we might need on the backside of the parking lot as well. So, it was, how should I say, and the other thing that we did, my carpenter and myself came up with was putting up an 8-foot wall to match the rest of the walls that were, that are downtown and could be used as another spot for pictures. That would serve as a little bit more of a physical, robust barrier than planters.
I like the fact you can walk through there.
Well, we were gonna leave an 8-foot gap so that we could, run the trackless machine through there. So it wouldn't be completely walled off. There would be a gap in there. As you see on the other one of the downtown walls, the main picture wall, you've got that spacing.
Okay, Rick?
Anyway,
I think in different financial times, building a wall would be wonderful. My idea of bringing that to council, and it came from a resident, the idea did not come from me, was that we took winter parking off of the south side of, the south side of Government Road, and this lot was flat, available, and right in the middle of the business section where we took the parking away, and we were replacing the parking with the off-street parking, which is much safer. So I'm not big in it. Like I say, if the town's finances were different, I'd say, yeah, let's beautify it. Let's make it a pretty parking lot. But right now, I'm just trying to provide parking. In future years, if we're in better economic conditions, then we can look at building walls. I'm not really concerned about the brake gas pedal thing. As a senior citizen, I usually can tell the difference. I know it happens once in a blue moon. Those cement planters are pretty substantial, especially when they're filled with dirt. Park bench, not so much. But in terms of beautification, I'd much rather see the 3 planters in a park bench
I agree with you.
with flowers in it than a steel barrier. I don't think it would affect our liability insurance, but if it does, let me know, and, I might have to reconsider. That's just my thoughts.
Patrick?
Yeah, while we still on the road, this storm sewer water, sanitary sewer shuttle, 75,000 study. I know eventually we want to do this, but it's not gonna be the end of the world if we postpone that till next year.
Actually, we're working with an engineering firm to have that scoped out as to what can reasonably be done this year. And we would be bringing that back. At this point, we just don't have that information. Ideally, we would like to get a firm in to do robotic inspection of it. I don't think it will be $75,000, but I don't know at this point. I just can't make a comment.
Stace?
Sorry.
Sorry, the storm sewer is the issue that we were discussing at the budget meeting that hasn't been gone into since 1995?
That's the one.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think it's wise to put that one off for another year. It's already waited since 1995.
I agree.
Because, yeah.
You guys are gonna try and get cameras, weren't you, Don?
We went down, we did a tour through it myself. There was a few of us, but I was part of the tour.
But I'm talking about recently. Weren't you looking at putting cameras
We
down
were
there?
trying
so
to get cameras, but
Yeah.
it is a long run. They were trying to do different.
From different points?
Points,
Yeah.
exactly, and, I'm not sure how the cameras will work. Robotics maybe, I'm not sure how they work in all honesty, but.
I have a concern having a person go underneath there.
Well, with the regulation changes now, yeah, like we had spotters and whatnot in each area of vent points that we can open up, but I just wanted to let you know that back in the 90s when we did do that trip through there, there were some support beams that I could see, supports that were failing. There were some supports for the sanitary trunk sewer system. That's a separate pipe, but it's within that tunnel, were failing. And that, again, that's in the early 90s or mid-90s when we did that tour.
Yeah.
So if that goes, something happens, it is critical. That's Chappie Hughes, Canadian Tire, all that section dumps into there for wastewater. And in the storm system, again, is part of that whole federal end and whatnot that dumps into there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be critical.
It's critical.
Yeah.
Can I ask about the fire department,
You can.
No, he's not. At least I don't see.
that, did we put the exhaust system in yet? Is that still,
No, I think that there is still some work to be done on it. They did modify the one that they had, and I think that he was waiting for a firm from Timmins to come down and make one last part of it, I think.
and the rescue truck, we do have some money, we have 75,000 reserve.
We have 75,000 in the working capital, the infrastructure reserve. And what he has put in is money for a 3/4 ton truck with a slider bed, 4-wheel drive, that he can position as a rescue vehicle.
And the,
The bunker gear is that?
bunker gear,
Yeah, it's on the very top page, line 4, I think.
how many, units does that, replace?
I think that's 5. And I think that I'm sorry, I could be wrong, but I believe it is 5, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's
Yes.
doing it in progression, yeah,
Yeah,
from what I understand. Yeah, Case?
yes.
Is the roof being done already? There was people up there.
I'm not aware that it has been done. It could have been that we're leaking too with what we've had.
Because there's a lot of construction going on there.
I have
Yes,
not been told that they're
be
working on the
patching.
roof. Yeah,
Okay.
that could be Dan Thomas bringing somebody in to get, oh, sorry, it is, yes. So it's Dan Thomas is our maintenance person, so he's probably just taking action to hold the fort there.
Rick?
Yeah, I'm looking, Transportation Services, Public Works, truck replacement building. Is that for the chief building officer?
It's for the office that he would be using it, but others would be using it as well.
Because when we had budget talks,
Talked
I-
about a car, yeah.
oh, that's last year? Okay. Sorry.
In the reserve for infrastructure.
Okay, so what I had suggested during budget talks, that the vehicle's primarily used by the chief building officer, and that we could buy a car and operate it less expensive than we can a truck. And, you know, I think that we should look into that. We also lower our carbon footprint if you want to be really green today, but it would cost a lot less, or, you know, with the price of gasoline, I think that's something we have to look at.
I think that as long as he has access to a 4-wheel drive so he can get onto site when he has to, that helps a lot. But Vic, if you want to make any comment on that.
I just need a vehicle and I need the appropriate vehicle for where I live.
Okay, so one of the thoughts that, just to build on, is, Councillor, if you don't mind, one of the things that we've come across is we probably do need to, purchasing a car would be a good idea, because when we're traveling out of town, be it councillors, be it staff, it would be far better legally for liability issues if you're using the corporate car, as opposed to your own vehicles. Because you do need a rider on your insurance, and we're working on trying to find ways to deal with that right now. So that could come in, that it would be a worthwhile purchase as long as he does have the vehicle, as he says, to get to where he needs to go.
Yeah, and that was something that didn't come up in the budget talks. I just said, does he have a bunch of equipment he has to carry, blah, blah, blah. And, I never thought of accessibility to different buildings. He would have to, but I'm sure that within a department the size of our department over there, that a vehicle sharing on certain days when Vic would need to go to these situations would work out best for the ratepayers.
Yeah, I think that, from the department's perspective, we want to make sure we have what we need, but we also know that that means giving and taking a little bit too.
Patrick?
Recreation, ice plant piping and ice plant repair. What's, same thing or?
No, they're
not?
actually two different parts, but it would probably be the same company. What we're hoping for is that we can try to talk them down a little bit, but I asked the same question. There are two different aspects of it.
So it's the plant and then the piping that gets it from there. So what's our current situation with the current one?
My understanding, and I'm sorry Chad isn't here because he's been pulling in extra hours over there, they have been repairing that on a fairly regular basis, and they know that they need to replace this. It's fairly predictable that this has to be done, and
Okay.
we're coming up to that point.
Rick?
Yeah, and actually at the budget meeting that Chad was at, he explained it fully. I'm not gonna try to re-explain it, but basically it came down to a health and safety issue. Yeah, the part they know is worn and it needs replaced. But if it goes, it puts ammonia into the air and then we have a major health and safety concern. So Chad did explain that.
Rick?
In the aqua part, and for the people in the public, just so you know, I do not have a conflict with Aqua. That's an outside contractor and has no impact on either my wife or my son's jobs. I just wanted to clarify that. How much of that work is got to do with the Kirkland Lake gold project that we're working on, or is this all our day-to-day operations, or?
No, funny you should ask that. I was going to speak about the Kirkland Lake Gold Project afterwards, but to be short about it, there are two items that could potentially be covered under the Kirkland Lake Gold Project that are listed under your Aqua capital right now. That's that flow water thingy, as well as the assessment for the Chappie Hughes station. So if we go ahead with the Kirkland Lake Gold Project, they can be covered under, for 45% funding, potentially 90% funding there. But the rest of the items are your actual day-to-day operations.
Okay, so that proposed infrastructure upgrade for Kirkland Lake Gold expansion, the 1.54,
Yeah.
1.5 million, 667,000 is funded, 852,000 is unfunded. Is there a potential that 852,000, some of that will be funded by another?
Yes, there is. What I'll do is I'll just go through this because, you know, creature of habit. It is a project to extend services to support industrial development and ensure sufficient supply. We originally proposed a $1.9 million project, and we did secure 45% funding based on that amount. Revised estimate is now 1.5 million. Above 45% funding is in place. We do have an application into the province for matching 45%. $700,000 of the 1.5 is dedicated to running services to the mine site. The proponent share is the responsibility of KL Gold. It's not the town. There, 855,000 is for municipal system upgrades. That is the town's responsibility. My recommendation, for what it's worth, is approve a project budget of $551,000 in the 2019 capital for the municipal components only. That will cover the replacement of the Miners Memorial valves. These are control valves established at the Miners Memorial. They are in a critical state of disrepair. We had to replace similar ones on Beaver Drive last year. We're anticipating that these will not last much longer. That would also replace the flow water meter and the Chappie Hughes pump station assessment for about $20,000. Why am I making that recommendation? Again, the valves are at risk. And for the other two items, the flow meter and the pump station, you already have them on your capital list. This way you have some funding to offset your costs. There's an alternative to save dollars. Move the control valves to 2020, and if they blow, while we come back and talk to council and the funding is still in place for it.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. There's 852,000 that is not covered by government funding. And you're-
That's,
So you're suggesting that we cover off 500 and,
that we spend 500,000 of it. I'm using my figures as opposed to on the budget sheet, because I can't barely see them. Okay, 855,000 is for the municipal portion,
I get it.
yeah, and of that, 45% is funded,
Okay, I'm looking at 1.5 million,
yeah.
and there's, the funded portion is 697,000.
Yes, and it's,
The unfunded portion is 852,000.
yes, and some of that, it's also over the period of the entire project. So that 700,000 for Kirkland Lake Gold, the extending the services, that's also in there as well. And yet we would not be covering that. Some of these numbers were updated afterwards, after we did the document. I'm saying go for 551,000. Okay, spend that this year.
Of taxpayer dollars,
Of project money,
of the total project.
of the total project.
So 45% of that would be funded, so we're
Yes.
looking at a $300,000 cost to the taxpayers.
Yeah, yes, you're right. I didn't break that part out. My apologies. My editor didn't catch that. And again, take the risk with the control valves, and that will bring your costs down quite substantially. It does require working with the funding agencies to extend the project. The other aspect of it is that one funding agency is still working under the assumption that we're looking at a $1.9 million project. So there will be additional dollars in there that we would have to come back and either turn back to the funding agencies or advise council if there are other items that you could do in support of the project and have some funding done for that.
Okay.
Okay.
Rick?
Yeah, the library budget there, digital microfilm scanner, I don't even remember us discussing that at a budget meeting. But then it's funded under other,
It's a donation.
okay, so that's no cost to the taxpayers, right?
Sorry, I was just gonna say, I had an email exchange with the librarian at the, library, and she informed me that they were going to buy it, and they have the donation money for it, so I've added it, because that's gonna be a capital item. But
Yeah,
that's why it was
but-
not originally on the list, because I
Yeah.
just found out last week.
Okay, but basically, it's at no cost to the
Zero to the
ratepayers.
ratepayers.
It's all donation.
Okay, that's, and another question, about the Aqua North Clarifier rate gearbox we got in there, 50,000, but I understand that the repairs come in considerably less.
Yes, we were notified this afternoon that they were able to get the crane for $8,000, and hopefully they can get the job done on Friday.
So,
And that's, sorry,
so it's 25 plus 8?
no, I think the 25 covers the 8.
25
So,
covers
yeah.
the 8, so it was worth raising then.
Pardon me?
It was worth bringing to council.
It was worth bringing to council. Sure.
Okay.
Gene, Dennis.
Go ahead, Dennis.
I was just looking at the swastika budget, and it's obviously swastika never cost us anything,
Oh, and not ever.
never. So it looks like, again, the swastika sewer is pretty much funded without any cost to the taxpayers. Is that the
Funny
way
you
it
should
works?
ask. It is a 5-year project resulting in long-term savings and environmental improvements for the town. The project value is $8,175,399. Funding is at 2/3, so it does cost you. TKL share then is $2,725,133. The plan was to use OSIF formula funding, which we get regularly every year, and that would cover a large chunk of it, and we'd have to go to the wastewater for the rest. Now, OSIF formula has been changing. They may not be honoring the same amounts in 2020 and 2021. We don't know what Mr. Ford is thinking. So we redid the numbers. The OSIF formula will pay for 1.2 out of the 2.7 that the town has to put in. The town is on the hook for the 1.5. In 2019, there will be no direct hit to the TKL because you're still using the OSIF OSIF formula funding. What we're asking for is $156,750. I'll back up a little bit. Stage 2 would commence in 2019. That's the final design and the construction. In 2019, he would be up to the point of putting out the tenders for construction. Construction itself would occur in 2020, 2021. 2019 budget ask is $475,000. The TKL share, $156,750 to be drawn from OSIF formula. Risks, inflation and higher costs due to unforeseen circumstances such as more rock in the road. We're already late in 2019 for a start date. And like I say, OSIF funding in 2021 is in doubt. We've already reflected that in the calculations. There are opportunities. We have applied for other funding, and the OSIF money may still come in. If so, it reduces the town's share. Recommendations: sign the agreement with Stantec with an escape clause, complete the design, defer the construction to 2020, which now has to be. At least that way we have a ready-to-go project for the future. The final design is done and ready to go, even if you have to sit on it. Strategic recommendation: complete the project to realize the long-term savings and avoid environmental problems. Swastika is not getting any better. And both your capital costs, I think, as you have to put them in there, probably are coming, actually, I think it's about 1.3 or 1.4 for capital upgrades to the Swastika project plant. So, pardon me? 1.5? So, that's come before council. It will be in the main agenda for discussing an agreement with Stantec. That's your background for the Swastika. It's not free, but right now you're using government money for it. Eventually, you're on the hook for the rest of the stuff.
Okay. And that's dismantling the plant or
At this point, no,
or
because
refurbing the plant?
Just settling it.
just, yeah, mothballing it right now and putting the pipes through. If we can realize more savings, because there were some items in there that, we may have some flexibility on, we'll come back to council as to what we can and cannot do with the plant.
Rick?
We have a water line that goes out to Swastika right now. Now, did anybody check to see if that water line is sitting on cribbing underground? Because I know sewer lines have to run below water lines, but if it's sitting on cribbing, maybe we don't have to do all this work.
Donnie will be able to answer that, but your environmental considerations would put a kibosh to that right away. Go ahead, Don, sorry.
Yeah, when it's designed or when it's done, there was no cribbing at all. It's a bed.
That was my question.
Yeah.
So it's a no-go. I just want
And I do recall what part of the design work was the sewer is going to be in a total separate trench.
Okay.
Other questions? I'll go, Stace?
Sorry, it's more of a statement. You mentioned, for an example, 10% across the board to cover this, or cutting 10% across the board. Personally, I am very not in favor of coming back in any way of saying such and such an amount or a percentage across the board, because we already have services that have been totally gutted over the years. We've heard today that we don't have enough staff to provide certain services and certain needs. So this idea of cutting X amount % across the board, that's what got us here in the first place. I think we're gonna have to kind of move away from that idea of across the board and do more targeted cuts.
Yeah, and I mentioned that as an option. You can go to every department and say, I want you to cut, and show me what's gonna happen. And then they can go back and then you can make a decision as to how that department will operate with less cash, or, how much less staff likely is what's gonna happen. You're gonna end up cutting staff, because that's what usually those cuts do.
And
But I'm just saying that's an option, not saying that's what we're going to do, or, okay.
And from staff's perspective, we appreciate the thought. We do have to just, caution that we're bringing it forward to you as we have, and the capital's the first one. That's a biggie.
The capital's the first one, you're right. Rick?
Yeah, I have a question for Sherry. all these items that were carried over from 2018, is the money in reserves to cover all those?
Yeah, actually, so if you flip to, I think it starts on page 3, and so if you go across, just even starting from the top, the very first one under general government, so the whole renovations for council chambers and the bathroom and everything, you'll see the 2,500. If you go to the far right, you'll see underneath infrastructure capital reserve, all of those amounts were put into that infrastructure capital reserve because we knew we weren't finishing them in 2018. So like I say, if you see an amount under infrastructure capital reserve, it's funded.
Okay. Good. We don't have to come up with that money too. Thank you, Sherry.
Subtotals, there's
You're now my new favorite staff person.
I guess his wife is out.
That's an outside issue.
Okay, so, Patrick, go ahead.
I'm willing to talk about the trucks for waterworks, so if that requires Rick to leave, then
And I'm sure a lot of people will be happy if I leave.
there is quite a bit of pickup trucks when you look across the multi-year. So what efforts have been done to do cross-department vehicle sharing?
That has been tried in the past. One of the problems that they have is that they're physically located in different locations, and they also have different start times, different responsibilities. And my understanding, I wasn't involved in it at that point, that became a cause of frustration and services being delayed. Example was most recently when complex or recreation staff go to clean snow, etc., at Heritage North. And if they have an early morning start, they have to be out there. They're already stretched for a truck to try to go and take it from somebody else when he's out doing, I don't know, hydrants or something like that. It becomes a tussle on that. It seemed to be more efficient to have them in place where they are. Where we could be looking, I think, for better efficiencies is on how those vehicles are managed across the corporation, regardless of where they are. And that goes back to the fleet management thing that we had talked about before. That's my recollection of it. Don, Steve, you guys have been around on that side of it a lot longer. Jump in.
No, we did try, we were short of vehicles a while back, and before we were able to purchase some and get us back up to what I feel is quota. We found it difficult, like either myself or Steve or anyone that would have to respond to any calls. We had to wait for to find a vehicle, or some cases Steve actually used his own vehicle to get out to a job site or to check the crews out. For the staffing, multiple reasons, such a main break or whatnot, we're tied up with vehicle stowing orders. You have a 3/4 ton truck with a DBH because the size of the machine. So that whole unit is sitting there, so you're down a vehicle.
Yeah. And what about leasing, Don? I know that we've talked about this a couple of times. You know, for a couple of years, I mean, you can see where the situation is with the community being in dire needs of or restricted cash flow. Is it possible that I'm not sure what the options are. I'm not sure if it's cheaper. I'm not sure if it's more money. But I'm just thinking if we get through a couple of years where, you know, this council can get its head around what's happening with the town's finances. Because I know for us it's all brand new stuff, and we're trying to keep the cost as low as we possibly can. And if that got us through a couple of years where you don't have to spend $56,000 for a 3/4 ton or $40,000 for a 1/2 ton truck, is it possible that I know you guys don't put a lot of clicks on, so sometimes leasing is a favorable option. I'm not sure that it would be. I'm just throwing it out as an option.
If I recall years ago when Joe Kitai was with us, I believe we had leased at that time, but we found that it was a digging truck, so we found that it got damaged and whatnot, and the cost to repair that leased vehicle, they felt it wasn't worthwhile.
And if that's the case, and if that's what the truck's going to be used for, if you think it's going to be something that could get damaged for some reason, then I would think maybe that's not a viable option. But if it's a truck that's just driving around town and used to do things in the community, that I'm just you know, you guys know what it's used for, I don't.
Yeah, no, I think it might be an option. We even went, one time we went for used vehicles, I believe when Frank was with us, and he purchased some used ones. But we find it harder and harder now to get used vehicles.
Yeah, I know they're difficult right now, because you're
Yeah.
going to the States, but.
But we went to, I can't remember how many, if you recall, Steve, used vehicles. It
But I
was
know
4 or 5, I think you got.
Pinewood and General Motors are, you know, they're pumping out the leases like crazy anyway. That's, you know, half the vehicles sitting at Kirkland Gold are leased vehicles, maybe more.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm just saying that if it's an option, then, you know, and it gets us through a year or two, so we don't have to spend money this year or perhaps next year
Yeah.
just to get us through, so that we can maybe spend money on a loader as opposed to spending money on buying vehicles.
Yeah.
We can ask the procurement manager to look into that,
Yeah. I
definitely.
was just gonna say,
Yeah.
we can look into it, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Stace?
Sorry, so for the first and second draft, there was 3/4 ton truck 79373 WW times 2. So I assume that at the beginning of this process, we were planning on 2 3/4 ton trucks, and now we're going for 1 3/4 and 1/2 ton. The price has gone up by 14,327. Have you guys received like quotes, or have you? Is this based on like now we've got estimates? Is that why the jump in figures?
Part of it is that it includes the back racks now, it includes the tires, it includes whatever happens with the taxes and that, whereas before you were given a quote that said, here's the price of a half ton or a 3/4 ton. If I'm incorrect, no, we're right. Yay, I got one right.
Patrick?
Yeah, so just where I only personally stand for the trucks is that, with the organizational review coming, a lot of their recommendations have been on the vehicle sharing, so I feel comfortable putting this one off to see what their recommendations are before we purchase 2 new ones. Just to see where we're at. That's just where I stand on that, cause that's $93,000, which is 0.9% tax levy increase.
Yes, Pat?
Yeah, Don, just could you clarify, when we lease vehicles, and they're used for commercial use, is there a limited warranty? You said there was a lot of repairs done on leased vehicles. Or do you get the same warranty, as the guy coming in off the street?
And in all honesty, I'm not really sure how the leasing factor works, but I do recall in the past, like years ago, when Joe and Frank were talking about the one particular vehicle that we had leased, it was very, very costly to maintain that vehicle, to repair it once the lease was over. I
I've
believe we were
also-
penalized, and
I've also put down that when the procurement person goes out and tries to get prices, he contact the mine procurement to see what kind of arrangement they may have for, because I'm pretty sure they're not that gentle in their vehicles either, right? And how are they dealing with it? He can ask the question at least.
Many major companies lease them, that's just, you know,
Yeah.
that's part of their standard procedure, they don't own a vehicle. So I'm just, it's potentially, I'm not saying it's the option, I'm just saying it's
Yeah.
potentially an option, and like I said, if it gets us through a year or 2 or 3, or, you know, so we can kinda look at it again, and, you know, there's always the option to purchase after you lease, usually there's a, you know, the difference is not astronomical, just,
yeah, buy it out, yeah.
yes, Dennis? Okay. Anything else? Are we gonna go through this and vote on the items we're gonna exclude from the budget? Is that how we're gonna proceed?
That would be the best thing if you could.
Is that the best thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
we need to get moving along with it, so.
Thanks, Don. Steve? So the decision, Rick, while you was out, was that we're going to look at the items here we're going to exclude from the budget, or, for example, the snow blower we talked about refurbishing. So those things right now, and then it'll give Sherry some numbers to work with, and she can come back and we can defer some items if they're, we want to exclude them for now, or if we think we should. And the projects are the same way, so if there's anything on there that you think we should either defer or exclude, we can talk about that now, okay?
If you wish, we could go through it line by line and just ask it flat out.
Sorry, there was only about 4 items that came up definitively, I believe.
I see the same thing, there's only about 4 or 5 items, so I don't think, do you want to go line by line?
No, I don't want to.
Well, I think it's be kind of
Sorry.
absurd, right? So the ones I saw were mostly on the public works and roads. I know that the loader, Rick, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I want parking lot $8,000, big saving, but it's $8,000
Okay.
we don't have to spend.
So let's, agreed? Anybody disagree?
Could I suggest that you put a nominal fee of maybe 4,000? It's something's going to
Maybe for
happen.
signage, I guess there's gonna be signage in there that says parking lot,
Yeah.
I would think so. Should we put a little bit in?
Yeah, there should be something there, and perhaps Ashley or Don or Steve could tell us how much signage was. When I looked at the parking lot next
the
to
old
the
Capitol?
A1,
Yeah.
there's a sign, and it's a very cheap way of not marking parking spots, but there's a sign with a map on it showing you how you're supposed to park.
Nobody's ever parked that way.
I
just
know,
so you
but I'm thinking that
Let's just move the sign.
Oh, okay.
I'm thinking not putting hard surface down and not really wanting to put the cement things to mark off parking spots. If we could put up a similar sign to that, I mean, this parking lot's is simpler, like, there's not a lot of variation, but
I'd just like to ask Steve, is it reasonable at 4,000 that you begin to work with that? If there's any increases, we're gonna have to come back.
Okay.
I'm hoping we're giving him 4,000, he's gonna come back and say he only spent 2, but
1,000.
I'm a wishful thinker.
1,000 for a sign. Okay.
Okay.
Because Junior is close to Junior's business, it may be perfect. Okay, the issue I saw, defer the purchase of the grader. Is that agreed? Or I'm not, I just want to make sure that everybody, go ahead.
Yeah, just so for like deferring though, like when we talk about like multi-year, like should we not leave like just a little bit left to like help us get to the next step?
Yeah, I think that's,
Can I just, it kind of goes to what you mentioned before. It's on, sorry. I know, because I always forget. Keep in mind that the capital budget is tied to the operating one. So what you decide here is one thing, but I'm gonna use my favorite example for the fire department. Rob's already told us that I think, what is it, the aerial truck or a pumper, he's gonna need one. So what's gonna happen is, you're not gonna buy that this year, it's not even on the list, but you know that that's gonna come down the pipe soon. So think about what you want to put in the reserves and the reserve funds for those items. So that's the same thing, like if you don't buy a loader or a grader or a backhoe, we can still, as part of the operating budget, put an amount in. Now, it still hits the levy, you're still asking ratepayers for that money.
Goes into the reserve though, Sherry?
It depends, like I say, we can figure out, but reserve or reserve fund, either way, it's gonna be, you're asking the ratepayers for that
Okay.
money. But the thing is, at least then, it's not one big hit, it's not you coming and saying, we're asking you for $400,000 this year, you could put $100,000 in this year, and then you're only looking for the difference. Like I say, just keep in mind that they're tied together, so the capital's one, what you decide here, there still are ramifications for the operating. But by putting money in each year for stuff you know that's coming down, at least then it's not one big hit.
Yeah.
And you can plan, and it goes
So
into the plan.
should this be done tonight in this capital budget, or is this something we should be doing with the
Let's put it this
operating?
way, if we can get through this for now, and then we can come up with those suggestions as part of the operating.
In the future?
In the
Okay.
future, like, and it
That's
can
right.
still be for 2019 operating, but like, say, we really need to establish what we're doing for the capital, so.
I get it.
and then we can come back with a recommendation. That's a good idea.
Okay, thanks,
Okay.
Sherry. Yeah.
Sorry, you have it.
Okay. Rick?
yeah, on the purchases of the equipment, I mentioned the trade-in value. So if I remember correctly, Steve said these were the actual prices that we're looking to pay for these.
Come on up, Steve. Here, please. Want to make you a star on YouTube.
Yeah. Infamous.
Anyway, yeah. Pardon me. And when we went out for pricing, for equipment, new pricing for equipment, I asked the individual sales reps to give us a quote as to what the residual value or the value, trade-in value of each piece of equipment that
Yeah.
we asked for. That figure was written down. I'm not sure if you have it or not.
No, no, and
I
I-
do have it. But no, each piece of equipment that we're trading in, each piece of equipment, sorry, that we're thinking of purchasing or have asked to purchase has a trade-in value. So we are trading in the old equipment
Okay,
for the
so,
new one.
so the price you have here of $407,040 for the loader, is it that price minus what they're gonna give us for the old loader, is the actual?
That's correct. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, if the figures that are reflected here, because we have an agreement that they're gonna take our old equipment on trade-in, right, Steve? At least a verbal agreement?
That's the correct. And if I may add, those prices do not include the municipal discount.
Okay,
So-
so I'm thinking that these prices are a little higher than they should be and should be refined before they go into the final.
Yes, we can
Capital?
do that. We also, though, need direction, as I said before, which items do you want him to pursue? Because then
Yeah.
he needs to deal with
Yeah.
the vendor and bring that down.
Yeah, okay. Now, the one other thing that I asked about before was leasing. Have we completely ruled that out?
No, sir, but until we know which vehicles, and then we can get from who we're dealing with, what are their lease terms, and we can compare it to the bank loans and other research. Right now, he's getting quotes from 3 or 4 different people. It's just tough to do.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to get the number as real as we can. I mean, we
If
don't
you
want to
can-
go and shock the taxpayers with
No.
that, and then come back later and say, oops, we saved 100,000 because we traded in equipment, so.
Yeah, no,
I'm
sir.
just trying to get as real a picture as we can for the ratepayers.
If
And
you
I'm
could-
not criticizing anybody or.
No. If you could tell us which vehicles you want, or pieces of equipment you wish us to go forward with, then we can take it from there and bring you back more accurate numbers, right?
Okay? Are you ready to go? The refurbishing of the snow blower, that was agreed upon, from what I understand? That was a $90,000 refurbish as opposed to being a $180,000 new. And it was apparently we're getting a better piece of equipment than we would have had if we'd bought new, from what I understand from Steve's explanation. Agreed? Okay. The next one that I saw was the Freightliner, yeah, okay. The Waterworks trucks, and I'm not sure where we stood on that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Before,
sorry.
can we leave that to the
Yeah,
end,
we'll leave that to the
Eugene?
end, okay.
Did we decide, I know we talked about it, and we asked Steve about it
I got it, okay.
at the budget meeting. If he had a choice, a grader or loader, he would go with loader. So did we decide?
On the loader.
To
Either
defer,
lease, either get a price on leasing or get a price to purchase.
and then we have a consensus that we're gonna defer the grader purchase?
That's correct.
Okay, and then the
And
backhoe,
and
did we come
And
up?
the backhoe too was gonna be deferred, from what I
Okay.
understand.
And I apologize to the guys who have to work with that equipment, but, these are not easy decisions. I'd love for them to have brand-new equipment, be able to do their
Okay.
jobs better.
Let's go on with this. The gearbox, that's all taken care of. Anything else in there? I see at the bottom, it was the proposed infrastructure upgrade. It was gonna be changed to, instead of 1.5 to 551, is that correct? Sorry. On page 2, isn't it? That was the Kirkland Lake Gold thing? Was that
The
not?
Kirkland Lake Gold,
So it was-
one, we will update that, yes.
To 551, 250,000 of that was to be funded by the government, and our share was 300, pending other potential
That's right,
grants? Is that what I understood?
yes, and we will update that.
Dennis?
Okay, I'm sorry, you went a little bit past what I wanted to.
Okay,
And
go
I-
ahead.
And I know I sound like I'm harping on this, but in talking with, back in February, when Ontario Clean Water talked about the SCADA system, and talking with Eric last meeting, he's under the impression, or he's telling us that we need this system now, so he's as far as I can see, they're looking at replacing the system this year, not next year.
That's not the telephone conversation we had with him today. He said he's preparing the narrative to go out to get the quotes and to get vendors. And he's replacing the other parts that would have to that have to be replaced as part of that project. but it's not replacing the system right now. He's working towards that.
Okay,
That's
'cause
the, Ashley, do you recall any different from that conversation? Okay, sorry.
because in February, they seemed like they were in quite a panic about this.
They're in a panic to get going with it, to get it done.
Yeah.
And they know that even the, preparing the narrative and going out for an RFP will take time.
Yeah.
So they don't want to leave that.
Yeah, I understood it was
And like I said-
2020 before they were doing it, too.
And last week, when talking with them, that's the impression I got from him, that they were in a panic mode.
They really do want to get it going. They don't want to leave it, lying there.
Okay, I just don't wanna see that other 400,000 show up all of a sudden when
No.
we never budgeted for it.
Okay, Rick?
Okay, well, just a clarification. Are we issuing the RFP or is Aqua?
If they do it, they would be doing it on our behalf. It would be ours in every term and way. We
So,
don't have the skill set to write that RFP.
okay, so just for to clear up my ignorance, when an RFP goes out, where does it go? Like, does it go to trade magazines? Does it go,
It's
is it
usu-
sent to individual companies? Like,
It
how
can be
does that
all of
work?
the above. It can be
Oh.
all of the above based on which is the best way to get response. Usually it is posted on like Bidingo and sites like that. It would probably be going out in the general media that the trades would be using. So news magazines.
Is it also sent out to individual
It
companies?
could be, yeah.
Okay, so,
Again, you have to be careful with that so you're not favoring. any.
okay,
That's the thing.
this is the question I have. If a counselor knows of a company, is it proper or not breaking,
Is
you
there a
know?
conflict? Is that what you're gonna?
Well, what I'm saying is it can that counselor forward that information to Wilf
Sure.
to be included?
That-
Or
that
is
part's
that a
fine. No,
conflict?
No, that part's fine. Where
Okay.
you have to be very, very careful is saying to anybody, well, you should come in and take a look and give us a quote. Because right now, they're lobbying, they're disqualified, you can't come in.
Yeah, okay.
So that we have to be very careful on. If you have companies in mind that you want to make sure do get that, even if perhaps they don't fit the narrative, that's their call. We will definitely make sure that they get it.
Okay, I just wanted clarification on that because I think some people around the table know of companies, and I just want to make sure that
That's fine,
they're
yeah.
able to forward that information to you. Thank you.
Patrick?
Back to Dennis's question on the SCADA system. So is this gonna be like a 2 or 3 year phase-in? Is that what we're talking about now?
I believe it's 2 years because they have to get everything ready now and then they will then make the purchase or bring in the software.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so the next one, I think what we're talking about was the proposed infrastructure upgrade. It's on page 2, Calgood expansion. It's the only one I saw. Was there something else? Did anybody else see anything before that? The SCADA system is notarized. The 551,000, that 1.5 million project Wilf is talking about, 551, 250,000 that will be funded by the feds and potentially,
Yes.
sorry,
You asked if there's others. Well, there's also the connecting link, right? You have $700,000 on that, 90% funded.
the 70,000 is gas tax, so it
Gas
really,
tax,
so the whole thing
so-
is pretty much self-funded.
It pretty
That's
much
not a
is.
concern. That
No,
was,
but if that-
it's when I see 800,000 is a concern.
Yes, I hear, but we can say then it's a go-ahead, right?
Any concerns?
Because I want to be clear, the gas tax that you put towards that is gas tax you're not putting towards something else.
Okay.
That's why I'm just raising it,
Okay.
that's all.
I have a question for Wilf. Are you aware of any other areas that we might need that gas tax for? Because as a counselor, I'm not, but
I honestly, I'd have to go through it piece by piece again. I think the staff have worked with Sherry to attribute the gas tax as well as they possibly could right now. I wouldn't mess with that.
okay, thank you.
Patrick?
Just curious as to the Ford government announcing that we'd be getting that 700. So where does that fall into anything as a possibility of funding?
It's really ambiguous when the stuff that has come down the pipe is, here's one big pot of funding that we want you to use to find efficiencies. Why? Because we're about to dump a whole lot of stuff on you. So you've already had libraries, healthcare. We've got this massive thing coming with community safety. What they're trying to say is, I think, prepare us for. Yeah, this is just a kiss on the cheek because the kick is coming right next. And they're looking to see where can we find, or they want us to spend it on efficiencies that can go. And I made the reference earlier to that diagnostic computer, right? There's one efficiency. A person to handle this community safety thing. There's a bunch, but I'd like to bring that back in a different discussion.
Okay.
It is not attributed by the government as to where beyond saying efficiencies.
Patrick?
Yep, so I just watched the Worksman give slash $4,000 on parking lots, so where else could we find like savings like that? Because that's 0.04% of a tax increase. So Aqua Waterworks, so some of these numbers that are here, I know they're not here right now to talk about this, but what is a priority?
These are pretty much the priorities, and if they're deferred, you will be really messing with the user fees going forward. And what happens, because they still have to be done. Two of the areas that I can say that if we go ahead with the Kirkland Lake Gold project, that's a $56,000 saving right there, because we can defer, take those two and put them into the funded program. The others, historically, Aqua has been very good in staying within its envelope, even though they might move between the items in between. And we've already gone to them and said, cut some more. Tell us only what you really need. This is what they've come back with.
Time for Rick.
What else do you see?
Time for Rick.
Except for Rick to leave, yeah.
Time for
Is that it? Okay. Rick? Yeah. Patrick?
Defer. Defer the trucks.
Do we want to look at leasing as an option, just as a side, in case it's worth it? I'm not
Certainly as a side bit thing, but as I mentioned before, like, if you, just organizational reviews, they do talk about fleet management and sharing. And
Yeah.
if they come in and look at what we have, right, then they can probably provide us some guidance on that.
Okay.
So,
Can I get a comment from the staff as, the peanut gallery? What is the impact, and if you had to fight for it, which truck would you fight to keep, and which one would you say, okay, we can defer?
Don't be looking at Ashley.
No, you
sure
just
you
come
can.
on up here. We need you on the screen.
Oh, that's right.
You get to be a YouTube sensation too.
I believe it was the old 3/4 ton 206, 2002? Yeah. So that's the two-tone color one that we patched
Rust and white.
together, yes.
The Flintstone model?
We tried, it sat for just over a year in the yard till we were able to finally found a box for it, got it put together, but there's some other work that was done to it. But again, it's an older vehicle, I would say that would be my choice too.
So if you can have somebody in procurement have a look at leasing and just let us know what that would be. And I would say 2 years in my mind, I don't know, anybody else? 2 or 3 years and just get some prices and see what it's worth, and then maybe we can look at that as a viable option rather than purchasing. We always have the option of purchasing it out at the end of the lease if it saves us some money for the first year or two and gets us in a better cash position.
Okay, I'll have that down.
I think, is there anything else in that budget that people want to have a look at? Those are the ones I noted when we were going through. Patrick, come on. Okay.
I'm being positive and
I know
happy.
you are. Okay.
Well, I'll ask then, what about the, sorry, Rick, what about the pickup trucks for replacement at building, airport, net? That's the ones for, oh, sorry.
Oh, those are last year's.
Yeah, last year's.
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
not
let's
stir
not
up
go
the
there.
hornet's nest.
Yeah, let's sell them back.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Has that truck been purchased?
Yeah. It's there, I saw it.
Was it purchased prior to that budget meeting?
No, it was, from last year.
I know it was from last year, but,
Oh,
okay,
dodged that bullet.
okay. Well, maybe the next time we need to replace a truck in another department, we transfer over that truck
That's the
and
idea.
buy a car.
We voted on that, by the way. No, we voted on that.
Yeah,
Truck.
I don't wanna hear it.
Just
I don't
saying.
wanna hear it.
You won't. It's a secret. Just don't watch the video. Okay. So, if that's it, then we have a motion for adjournment.
It's moved by Councillor Dennis Perrier, seconded by Councillor Rick Owen, that council adjourn its finance meeting of May 14, 2019 to a regular meeting of council.
All in favor?
Do you want to
Unanimous.
take a
5-minute break, so if you have to go to the washroom, go.
Welcome to the council meeting of May 14th, 2019 at 6:30. Notice, council will hold a public planning meeting on June the 4th, 2019 concerning a proposed zoning amendment at 1 Duncan Avenue North. We have a moment of silence. Approval of the agenda.
It's moved by Councillor Casey Owens, seconded by Councillor Rick Owen. The council approves the agenda for its regular meeting of May 14th, 2019 as presented.
All in favor? Passed, unanimous. Declaration of pecuniary interest. None declared. Petitions and delegations. None. Acceptance of the minutes and recommendations.
It's moved by Councillor Rick Owens, seconded by Councillor Casey Owens. The council accepts the minutes of the regular meeting of council held May 7th, 2019.
All in favor? Passed, unanimous. Reports of municipal officers and communications, CAO.
One of the projects that we identified as an outlier during the budget deliberations was the Swastika project. It is a 5-year project, began a few years ago. We're at the point where we're entering into the stage 2, the final design, and from that we'll be able to go to construction. Stantec Engineering is the proponent that we're recommending we sign the agreement with. The project itself, I think that you've had a number of times where it has been brought to your attention and explained, but one of the things that, as I mentioned in the budget deliberations, is that we have to notice that there has been a change with the OSIF formula-based funding, that it is no longer guaranteed for 2020 and 2021. The original plan that this was put together for the funding of this project did rely on OSIF formula funding to offset the municipality's share of 2.7 million. It's a difficult decision. Do you want to continue going forward? One of the issues, as I raised, is the consequences of not doing anything or of canceling is the fact that the Swastika plant does require a lot of, well, tender loving care and a lot of dollars that go with that. So even if you were to say, okay, we want to walk away from this project, your actual costs are going to continue to be incurred. This is a chance where you do have 2/3 funding to do a project that is in the longer term good of the community, so we're recommending that we go forward. However, we will negotiate in the agreement an exit clause that if anything occurs, we can terminate the agreement and just walk away perhaps with the final design in hand, ready to go for construction in the future. That is not what we want to do, obviously. We have spoken with Stantec, we've spoken with Aqua. We do believe there are means that we can exercise to bring the price, the cost down. Stantec did make their presentation a few weeks ago. They went over that. Just for example, one would be a new type of pipe that doesn't have to be buried as deep, so it could save on rock blasting. There are other areas. One of them is that we would also approach the government to make allowances for inflation. Another one is that we are putting in applications to other programs to pay for performance and the Green Municipal Fund. We don't know what the response is to those and when we will receive a response to those, but we are continuing to look for other funding opportunities as well to offset the municipalities. So at this point, we're asking council for permission to enter into or to negotiate an agreement with Stantec. That is the basis of the request. I'll stop at that point.
Councillor Owen?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. We used Stantec in phase 1, right? And when we went out to phase 1, was that a competitive bid process?
Yes, it was.
Okay, thank you.
That'll be coming back as a bylaw. Manager, whoops, sorry. Clerk, resolution of support for the 100th Anniversary Committee.
So this is much like the resolution that came at last meeting in support of the 100th anniversary. The 100th Anniversary Committee is looking at putting the Prin Community Beer Tent at the corner of Government Road and Duncan Avenue. And they're looking for a resolution of support for the alcohol and gaming application process. So I have a resolution that's moved by Councillor Rick Owen, seconded by Councillor Dennis Perrier, that council declares that the Kirkland Lake 100th anniversary celebrations are a municipally significant event for the town of Kirkland Lake, and that council supports the Prin Community Beer Tent located at the corner of Government Road and Duncan Avenue from 4:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. from June 24th to 29th and July 2nd to 6th, 2019.
Any further discussion? Questions? All in favor? Opposed? 6 in favor, 1 opposed. Whoop, sorry, two opposed. Passed. Thank you. Manager Planning and Land Development.
Okay, so my first report here has to do with applying for the Connecting Link funding, and the purpose is to repave a portion of Government Road East. It's actually not going to go quite to the ONR tracks. It'll be the Township of Tech and LaBelle Township boundary line, right through to Burnside Drive. So it's about a $700,000 project, and we're looking at having to cover 10% of the funding, and we're recommending that that be provided through the gas tax. So there's no hit on the levy for this one. It does eat up some of our gas tax that's available, but it is a good project to tackle now that we have the funding. I'm not sure how long this Connected Link provincial program will be available in the future, so we do recommend that we proceed with applying.
Councillor Adams?
So how was this section of road decided upon?
I believe this is the area that there's no infrastructure underneath, so the infrastructure didn't need to be replaced, so it's an easy one to tackle. I think the rest of them, that goes towards Chappie, there's an area there that needs to get done, I'm pretty sure. And that one does have infrastructure in it. The water, sewer, and sanitary are not included as eligible expenses for this program.
There has been a progressive
Mm-hmm.
evolution of going down government road as part of the connecting link, so this ties into it.
Councillor Owens?
No, Ashley answered my question. I was gonna ask about infrastructure. Thanks, Ashley.
No problem.
Since they're redoing Highway 66 on the MTO side, is there a way to tap in on some cost saving measures there, or?
This is the cost saving measure. It's 90% funding
Oh, that.
from the province, yeah.
No.
Councillor White?
Sorry, this is just like a procedure thing. The ride comfort rating within the construction area has been rated between 1 and 3. So when was this done and who does that?
That's something that was done, I think Dixit actually did that back when we did a road study that was done with the official plan back in 2012 or 14. I can't remember exactly the date, but I do believe Dixit, yeah, I'm pretty sure he did the comfort road rating when he first came on as well in 2014. I do remember that happening while I was working on the official plan. So I think that's something that we continue to do on an, is it biannual basis or? Yeah.
Councillor Owen?
Yeah, Ashley, I've never heard of this before, and I may be asking an unfair question that, what is this? What does it entail? How do we come up with these numbers? Like, it fascinates me. It sounds really good, but I don't understand it.
I probably would have to get Steve to come up and explain exactly what that process is, but I'm pretty sure you're driving it around, right? And there's ratings that are available, I guess, on the government that puts out what you'd rate it as. Yeah. Do you want to nominate yourself to do it next time, or?
Any further questions, discussions? Resolution?
I have a resolution that is moved by Councillor Casey Owens, seconded by Councillor Patrick Adams. The council directs the acting chief administrative officer to proceed with an application for the Connecting Link funding to repave Government Road East, Teclabel Town limits to Burnside Drive, and that if the application is successful, the 10% town portion would be drawn from the gas tax funding.
All in favor? Passed, unanimous. Property standards and, sorry. I've got about 3 of them here now. Oh, from Ashley. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ashley. That's on the clarifier?
Yes, sorry, I forgot
Yeah.
about this one. This
Sorry.
is just an update to the, I guess it was last week we presented the North Clarifier. We did get wind that the crane rental was going to be $8,000, so we were able to reduce the request to council for the budget to be approved at 50 down to 25, which was their original ask. So we're just looking for approval to go ahead and put that on the capital budget before capital gets approved. Yes, yeah. That's why we pushed it for today.
Any further questions, discussions?
Resolution that's moved by Councillor Casey Owens, seconded by Councillor Rick Owen. The council approves the request for $25,000 be added to the 2019 capital budget for repairs to the wastewater treatment plant North Clarifier, and that this amount be drawn down from the wastewater reserve fund.
All in favor? Passed, unanimous. Property standards and vacant buildings.
So I do have two reports to present to council. What I tried to do, I had, me and Vic actually sat down and tried to come up with a very general presentation about the differences between property standards versus community standards and where that need for that vacant building bylaw comes in so that everyone understands, I guess, the enforcement process in very general terms and the applicability of those two bylaws that we currently have in effect right now. So Vic is here to answer some questions as well because he's been doing a lot of the property standards enforcement for several years. So if there's questions about the process and what's been, yeah, thanks, Vic. So we did want to put a bit of a disclaimer in here. We did this as a brief overview of the process available under property standards and community standards. So we don't want it to be used for legal interpretations and that we don't want to be held responsible for the misunderstanding or misapplication of the information. As you can imagine, property standards and community standards are very much, it could be looked at a million different ways. We have one situation, but the way that the person reacts to that one situation could lead you in a completely different legal way of dealing with it. So we tried to generalize as much as we could, but best to communicate directly with us if there's an issue. We did make reference to section 15.1 of the Building Code Act, which is where property standards gets its legislative ability to exist. So the purpose of this presentation was to inform council and the public on the general difference between property standards and the community standards bylaws, and to briefly describe the processes that are in each of those bylaws. It's also to introduce the purpose of the vacant building bylaw. Community standards, this was brought in via the Municipal Act. So the bylaw itself is there to enforce the maintenance of land in a clean and clear condition. So more property specific rather than building specific. To summarize, community standards deals majorly with the aesthetics of properties, like grass cutting, landscaping, animal feces, placement of garbage, and the enforcement of that is actually done by our bylaw enforcement agency, Turtle Island. And it involves providing notice and issuing a ticket under the Provincial Offences Act. And in some severe cases, it can escalate to court. So I did just provide some of the fines that can be issued. You can see there, failure to keep the ground clean, littering on town property, littering on private property, the garbage, putting it out too soon, placing freon gas appliances, on private or town property, clean up weak refuse and it being left out for too long. So there's a whole bunch of things in there that they're capable of ticketing under the Provincial Offences Act, and that's just a set fine. If it doesn't get paid, it escalates to court, and they decide whether or not they throw it out or not. This one's relatively easier to enforce than property standards is. The requirements of property standards, this was introduced in Ontario in the 1970s under the Planning Act. It was moved under the Building Code Act in the 1990s. It requires property owners to repair and maintain their property in accordance with the standards that are in that bylaw. For the most part, property standards is concerned about the care and maintenance of properties for the residents that are within the building. So things that our property standards bylaw deals with is the structural adequacy, so roof walls and foundations, the safety, so guard railings, stairs, making sure there's adequate lighting, plumbing, heating, and ventilation's available, electrical systems are available to tenants or residents. The occupancy standards, making sure you don't have too many people living in a smaller area, the design standards that are inside the home. And it also has provisions within it for fire damage or vacant buildings and illicit marijuana operations. So as you can see, property standards deals more with the building, whereas clean yards or community standards deals more with the property itself. So that's general rule of thumb is if it's I guess a property issue, you're probably going to be dealing with our bylaw enforcement agency. If it's a building issue, you're likely going to be either dealing with Vic or he'll forward you on to, it could be the landlord tenancy board, could be, I would just make the, yeah, it's Miss Ming Health. Yeah. So just to continue on with property standards, bylaw enforcement is dealt with by the property standards officer, which is currently Vic, and it's as spelled out in the Building Code Act. This is certainly not a clear process. As I mentioned before, it really depends on the particulars of each individual situation. So to give you an example, if obviously if there's a structural inadequacy and a building's about to fall down, you're going to deal with it differently than if a window's left open. So it really depends, then it's a matter of how the individual reacts, whether it's something that's resolved immediately or if it's something that they're not resolving and we're having to escalate it further on into potentially going to court. So generally, the enforcement involves a process of giving notice, issuing an order, and giving reasonable time to comply, and providing a right to appeal. So there's a right to appeal to the Property Standards Committee, which we'll also be talking about tonight. The order is to be served personally or via registered mail. So we have to make sure that we have proof of them getting that order. Failure to resolve the nonconformity can result in it being brought to court for a ruling. The municipality may also decide to conduct the required work and charge all related expenses to the tax roll. We do have a priority lien status under the Municipal Act, so we're first to get the money back if we decide to go ahead and conduct work on that property. We can also execute emergency orders where the work is completed immediately. So this requires, if there's an immediate danger of the health and safety of anybody, you would tackle this work immediately and get it done and then charge it right back to the tax roll, and it's a little bit less of a.
No, you have to go to court.
You have to go to
Judge
court first, okay,
decides
sorry.
whether you
This
get
is why
any-
he's here.
If you get any money, some
Sorry.
money, if you get any money, some money, or no money, and it's the judge's decision on that, you can't charge that back, because you're actually not giving notice, you're immediately, responding to the danger, however you do it, and then you have to, within a certain time period, bring it to the courts for their decision on what's going to happen.
Okay, sorry, that one is a different process.
Yeah, we don't use that one because, you could be out a lot of money if you're going to go in and, demolish it or do something to a building. But in some cases, you might have to. We've never, in the time that I've been here, we've never issued an emergency order. Councillor White? Sorry.
So I think the obvious question is why has there never been a building that was so far gone that it proposed a risk to public?
When there's occupants in the building and it's collapsing, yeah, your first thing that you would do is make sure that the occupants are out of the building. And then you would either secure the site or whatever. Would you go ahead and demolish at that point? Probably not. When it's related to fire, fire marshals do their investigation, police do their investigation, and then the building is released. It's still somebody's private property. You can't trespass upon the property. You can't do any work to the property, because if you do demolish it, you may have to replace that building. If it's a commercial building, it'd be millions of dollars. If it's a shed, well, you kind of relate the costs. But you have to understand that this is somebody's personal property. You just can't enter upon somebody's house or a property without being invited. So, and each case is specific to a certain problem. And all these problems, once you go on there, it's confidential, because you're building a case if you're gonna go to court. It's not something that you tell the public or it's publicized. So when somebody, comes in and says, well, I've got a complaint, get back to me, we don't get back to them. We do our job, and somehow it's brought to resolution, because you're gathering evidence to go to court if it goes there. If it gets resolved by, mediation, or the person after a notice or an order does it, then it's complete. But we don't report that to people that make the complaint. That's the way the process works. Councillor Ivanov?
There's a home that, there was one I know it's empty, had a fire in it. Now it's a safety hazard for people around the area. It certainly isn't a beautiful site. I'm not sure if the person that's there is still paying their taxes or whatever, but is there anything you can do with something like that, or is that something that,
Well, if it's public safety, if the municipality wants to site secure it by fencing it,
yeah?
we can.
So-
We try to, I'm not sure the specifics of the property.
Yeah, and I
nor-
don't want to talk about it because it'll probably tell you who it is, but
Yeah.
it was the,
And we're probably, if that's the case, we are working or try to work with the people
Yeah.
or anybody that's involved in that property, because after a title search, there might be charges, there might be other people that
Yeah.
are in that picture as well.
and are you working on a complaint system? Is that what happens when people complain? Do they have to call in and have a complaint?
It's
Is that how-
reactive.
It's not something
We're
that you
not
go around,
proactive
you don't drive around
because-
town and look for
Pardon?
you don't drive around town looking for issues.
If you see something or whatever, you may address it.
Yeah, I saw one where
we don't
somebody's,
have a big
somebody
staff.
thinks having pallets and sticks around their home, you probably know which one I'm talking about.
That is something that would, see, there's where you distinguish between property standards and community standards.
Yes.
Because then a community standards enforcement bylaw enforcement officer would deal with those things.
Okay. Again, with a verbal complaint or a phone call to the town?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Owens?
Yeah, this is, there was, I'm not gonna mention the address, but there was a situation this winter where snow, had caused the building to lead into the street. Now, in this case, we were fortunate, the landlord came in and corrected the situation. But would that be the type of thing, and again, we're talking generalities, and I know there's legalities and everything, but would that be the type of thing that you would, like, if you couldn't get a response from the people that owned it, is that the type of thing that you would, well, obviously you'd first blockade it off, but then if you couldn't get a hold of the owner and you were really fearful that it would fall in the street, is that what you were, like, is that what this is aimed for, is those type of situations?
Well, if there's an immediate danger, you address the immediate danger. If there's a potential, like, I mean, you can't work on hypotheticals. So if you think it is, you'd fence off an area, which I think in this case, that's what the municipality did. But I mean, everybody, or hopefully everybody has insurances, and again, I'll go back to, it is somebody else's property. They're liable for anything that happens to the neighbors, to the public. We try to, when it brought to our attention, to notify these people, and it's easy when they're in town and we build a, we know sometimes who they are, but when they're out of town, sometimes it becomes difficult. And that's where it takes longer. Like if the building is accessible, some of these buildings that are unoccupied, somebody breaks in, the door's open, either the police or somebody tells us that the building is accessible. It's not our, it's not our job to shut the door, and it's their job. We have to give them notice.
Vic, on here I noticed all windows capable of being opened shall be equipped with a screen to prevent the passage of insects, and the screen shall be maintained in safe and good condition.
That's when you're occupying the building. A lot of second-story buildings, a lot of people open them for ventilation for whatever reason. There's nobody living there, and I understand that you're saying some things can go in the building. If we amend our bylaw that all buildings have to be boarded up after the second story.
Well, I think that's the point. There's a number of buildings in the community, in the downtown area, that have, they're boarded up at the ground level so people, and the building's secured, but up on the second and third floor, the windows are broken, or
Yeah, and that's the, I
they're
understand.
not boarded up.
The,
What power does this bylaw do for the town to remedy that?
It could be a regulation within the bylaw. The problem is when it gets to court, the intent of property standards is to protect the occupants or protect the safety of the residents, or, so when you start, when you bring in a fence that's, the window on the second floor of an unoccupied building was open, whether you, chances are it's not gonna be taken as seriously as this building is falling over and collapsing on someone's property. That's, it's just whether or not at that point, once you get to court, is it going to be enforced to actually make a difference where they're bordering up those windows?
Yeah, I guess I'm going towards the pigeon
yeah,
issue.
Yeah.
I think
That's-
you're leading to that, and that's kind of, that's the problem. The problem is when there is vandalism to the building, and then something enters, I mean, we can notify the owners on a complaint that, yeah, there is birds getting in your building. But if they do nothing, it's hard to enforce them to do something there. And then are we going to, at the expense, board up all the buildings? I mean, we can. And then issue an order, and then
Yeah.
giving time to comply, giving time to compel.
There could be
going
safe-
through
yeah.
the process and then seeing what happens.
And there could be safety issues with our staff going into the building
Well, there's
itself.
health and safety going into any, we don't
Yeah.
go into unoccupied buildings because it's not our building to go into. We can only go into a building under property standards if
if we are granted rights of access to respond to a concern while the occupant is living there that is, in contravention to our, property standards bylaw.
Because, I mean, let's face it, most abandoned buildings, these people are not paying their taxes.
And
So
that's
the
how it's
chances of-
hard, yeah.
Councillor Owens?
Okay, Vic, if I understand right, we can board up the windows on the first floor?
After
Unders-
you go through the process
Yeah.
and they have done nothing,
Yeah.
then the municipality, then they may do something.
Are we risking being sued by the owner
You
for
can be
damaging,
You can be sued
the
by any-
property?
You could be sued by anybody at any time if they don't like what you're doing. That's
Yeah.
why you get.
Yeah, that's-
The key is, it's somebody's property.
Yeah.
And if you have a piece of property, and for some reason we pass a bylaw, the municipality passes a bylaw that we don't like something, and we go and try to affect your property, you could be liable for a lawsuit, or, they can be enough of them to come to council and try to change the way.
Yeah, I mean, I can see somebody saying, well, you ruined my windowsills by putting nail holes in and then the water got in, when in fact they were rotten to start with, but you go to court, you get sued and we pay them off and
What
it ends
right
up
do you have
costing.
to be on my property?
Yeah.
Who gave you that right? I'm the
Yeah.
owner. I mean,
Yeah.
There's and those are the legal difficulties when the building's unoccupied and when somebody doesn't really want to do anything that the municipality tries to get them to do. And that's the hard part. If there was an easy solution to getting to people to comply, there'd be a really easy step-by-step, and it's not. Some people, when there's an issue, they'll respond right away. Oh, didn't know. Some people need to be motivated, but if they're not paying their taxes, they're waiting for it, and the process will, after a certain amount of time, it will end. Sometimes takes a little longer. The court wait takes just as long too, so you weigh the two, except for the court wait, you're
Yeah,
spending
sorry,
money too, so.
just turn it.
I think part of the issue, too, Vic, is,
I didn't plug in.
if it's an abandoned building, you can put all the work orders against the building as you want, and the owner is not gonna comply. If they've abandoned, they're not paying their taxes,
Yeah.
they really don't give a hoot. And it makes it very difficult for us.
And what our biggest concern is to make sure that there's nobody's entering the building. General public doesn't go in there, or if there's a condition on the property that's fenced in so that they don't go in there. And then the process will take its time, and then if they're not, it'll end up in our hands anyway.
One sec. Just one thing I wanted to add. I know, just recently I found out, we have a number of buildings that it's now, we can register after 2 years, used to be 3, is that correct?
I believe so.
There is a backlog of the town registering on properties that we had the opportunity, and due to staff shortages, training, whatever the case may be. But that's part of the issue that adds to the pigeon problem in the community. And I talked to Ashley today about that, and Stacy as well. We've talked about this, about some kind of, not necessarily having the owner register, but a list of the properties that are abandoned, and what procedures that we have done to protect the community. And right now, and the fact that we'd like to know if they are being registered and not waiting 2 or 3 years beyond that point, because the buildings deteriorate further, then the pigeons move in, if things just get worse. And personally, I'd like to see that, some type of a list, and it's not to find out who the owner is, but so council is aware of what's happening with these abandoned buildings, because it's been going on, I'm not blaming you, Vic, been going on for a long time. And we know in Chappie's, good example, there's 17 buildings out there that it's a fire trap. And if we don't do something, we're gonna be liable in the end.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. The hard part is how do you do it? Because there's no provision for enforcement to go in and say, we just do it. Like I said before, it's somebody's property, so unless they're going to do it, or we issue the order and there's non-compliance, and then we can move ahead. And that's after getting legal consultation to make sure that we've, crossed our Ts and dotted our Is, and they can't come back and us replacing new buildings. Fire hazards, I don't know, because I'm not fire department to comment on fire hazards. I imagine any wood frame house could be a fire hazard if somebody lights a match to it. It doesn't have to be just in Chappie Hughes. I understand Chappie Hughes, there's an older part of it. I know that the leaseholders in certain areas last year and the year before have demolished a couple of them. There's still more there. I drove there today on another issue, and I see a lot of community standards violations where there's a lot of maybe garbage or whatever. If there's any buildings that are accessible, we can start the process to make sure that they are boarded up, but I mean, that's the point that I can take it to, for a securing site. There's one area of a street where the ground is unsafe. There's a sign posted there. There was a court proceedings way back 23 years ago. One portion of one of the buildings looks like it sank. I don't even know how to deal with that.
Okay.
I don't
Councillor,
know who owns it, whether it's the leasehold, because I tried researching and I couldn't find,
Councillor White?
Sorry, are we still just on, property standards, or are we doing both together? The vacant,
I'm not at vacant building yet.
okay.
this is basically just
Leading up to it.
distinguishing between community standards, property standards, conditions on the yard, conditions of within the building for occupancy.
Sorry, I jumped ahead.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, and it's, it would be a good idea to have a list of buildings that are vacant, and then see where they are. And I'm not sure who initiates when they actually get registered. Because I believe there's a fee for that too,
For,
to register a building.
for what, for a
On
vacant
the
building?
town's protected, no, to register it
For tax
for
service?
tax.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And
Because
there's
that's-
some privacy issues with that as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how many you can register. Don't really know. I know through the process of the almost 14 years that I've been here, we've demolished quite a few buildings along the process. Whether working with the owner, tax sales after they haven't been bought and then they're vested into the town.
Yeah, I realize I jumped ahead on the abandoned buildings, but there is an issue with the registering delays, and that's a separate issue from property standards, I agree.
Because in property standards, and it doesn't matter throughout the province, it doesn't matter how big the community is. Basically for unoccupied buildings, there's a provision to that, if it was burnt, the people that do their investigations, and then the property's dealt with. Normally, in a lot of cases, insurances, and then the insurances clean up the property. In the cases where there's no insurances, then we're left with a kind of mess.
Yep.
And how to deal with it, that's the hard part, because then you have to negotiate with the owner as to, okay, what's your intent? Are you gonna do anything? And normally in the cases where there's no insurance, they don't want the property. You take it, and that's where we try to get them to sign a waiver legally binding to say that, okay, if the council decides to remove the property, it's gonna cost money, but then they can't come back after us to say, well, you ruined my building or whatever.
Yeah. Councillor Owens?
Yeah, this is a question for Ashley. Today I got asked a question, it had to do with our community standards. And I advised the person to phone the number at the Works Department and that a request for action would be opened. And I just want to make sure that I instructed the person the proper thing to do,
No,
so,
you did.
because I think I'll probably get more queries in the future and I don't want to send them to the wrong place.
Yeah, I'm telling everybody to send them to physical services so we have it tracked in our activity request system. And I can also take a look, before it gets sent to Darren, I'll take a look at it to make sure that it's a legit community standards issue that he should be dealing with. And there's times where it's an ongoing issue and we have 3 years of information that we can provide him with, and it gives us that opportunity to collect it. So yes, definitely go to physical services first. Okay, so to continue on, if brought to court, so if this is an enforcement issue and it gets to the point where we've escalated to court, the judge has the ability to either rescind, modify the order, or uphold the order. There is the ability to apply a maximum penalty for individuals for certain offenses up to about $50,000 for the first one and $100,000 for any subsequent offense. Our existing property standards bylaw, we are going to be looking at that tonight in my report to council. It was passed in 2014. It's recently been reviewed by our solicitor, and recommendations were made, and we'll present those shortly. I don't get into the details of it right now, but I'll have the report separate. So just to sort of, again, very briefly, this is a brief summary of the differences between both. There's a lot of them, but this is, if I had to put it in a nutshell, your legislative authority is different. The community standards, you have the authority through the Municipal Act. Your property standards is through the Building Code Act. The purpose of it, community standards, is to maintain land in the clean and clear condition, whereas property standards is primarily to protect the occupants. You're dealing with the aesthetics of the lands, or property specific with community standards, versus maintaining the occupancy conditions of the building, or building related issues with property standards. Enforcement, you have the short form ticketing that's actually issued through the Provincial Offences Act, whereas property standards is set by the Building Code Act. So there's enforcement's a lot trickier with the property standards. You have to negotiate compliance, wait for tax sale, or have a signed waiver from the owner. And the court system, it needs legal professional involvement, so it's a more costly process to go through than community standards is. So moving into proposed vacant building, and this is probably where you've seen that gap. So property standards, it's an unoccupied building. We have a section within our property standards bylaw that is maybe half a page long that deals with unoccupied buildings. There's the ability, and I think there's 4 or 5 municipalities in Ontario that have passed a vacant building bylaw. So where a building is vacant, this bylaw is meant to protect such building against the risk of an accidental or intentional danger, and it's done by preventing the entry of unauthorized persons. When buildings are vacant and barricaded appropriately, this is in the property standards bylaw. If at this point all we're really concerned about is making sure that the buildings are vacant and they're barricaded appropriately. So we're making sure that we're protecting the residents. Right now, the way we deal with vacant buildings is we attempt to negotiate compliance, and if there's no response, we proceed by either securing consent by way of a signed waiver, negotiate the purchase. This gets tricky because the majority of times we check title and there's either liens or charges against them. So if we were purchasing that property, we're also getting all of that lien and charges that we also have to be responsible for paying back as well. So typically when that happens, we wait for the tax process to be finalized, and we're getting them maybe 3 years down the line. We do need to execute caution when dealing with the demolition of structures. It could result in liability and potentially a need to reconstruct the building. So the process is very, very key, and we've done it now. We actually did get a legal opinion when we throughout the whole process of doing it, because it was pretty tricky to navigate. And when we figured we had the okay, we didn't have the okay. So it was a good thing we had our lawyer guiding us through the process.
It's the service of the order.
Yeah.
I mean, the person actually has to be served, and that's the tricky part. You can mail it, registered mail, and a lot of it comes back because they know the process. If they accept it, and that's where I track it after, and I'll see the signature, print it, it's confirmed they've been served. A lot of it comes back undeliverable, and then you're back to the thing, okay. What do we do now? An email was sent in one case, and because they accepted the email, one law firm said that it was fine, one law firm said that it wasn't okay, so what do you do then? So,
It's a tricky process, and it's
it is.
eye-opening experience
And
trying to.
all unoccupied buildings don't always require to be demolished, because there's a couple of cases that I just wanna mention is the old DVA building that got turned into, all the Ontario services, as well as the, apartments on the 2 stories or whatever. That was the building that was unoccupied. Look what happened there. The funeral home has just been purchased, and there's, things that are going to happen there. So just because they're boarded up, one in Swastika, the old train station, it's unoccupied, boarded up, but they might be rehabilitated in time. Some of the ones that are in very bad shape, those are the kind of the ones that you wanna target that may be potentially actually falling down in front of you.
Are those
And
damaged by
normally by
fire?
that time, they should be registered and as a tax sale, maybe the neighboring property might wanna, purchase it and tear it down and purchase the lot and put up a garage, cause a lot of the lots in some of these areas, in the older areas are smaller lots. And, you know, it's a good opportunity to expand your lot. where you put it. Sorry, that was just.
So, we have heard council, and we recognize that they've raised concerns related to the aesthetics and the perceived health and safety issues related to these vacant buildings. Council has requested that we review opportunities for regulating vacant buildings. We were provided with templates of vacant building bylaws for other municipalities to review. And essentially, again, being very general, the process that we've kind of discovered through these bylaws is the creation of a vacant building registry, and there are registration fees associated. There's ongoing monitoring by the municipality, so inspections that are taking place and fees associated with those inspections, and enforcement of safety concerns noted on the inspection. So if they do note that there's something wrong with the safety, or there's a safety concern on that building, they'll proceed with the enforcement of it. So my report to council on this actually details this in a little bit better detail. But the challenges that we're looking at from our staff perspective and bringing them to council's attention is we definitely would need additional staff in order to target this. I can't foresee this working on a cost recovery program. Typically when the vacant building owners that we have in town are typically not paying their taxes. So how are we supposed to impose additional costs on tax roll and then get them back? I'm not sure whether we're gonna see a cost recovery program happen if we tried to implement that. Buildings after 2 to 3 years of deterioration are not feasible to rehabilitate. We've ran into that a few times with, our winters are a lot harsher than they are in Southern Ontario. So after 2-3 years of a building sitting vacant, typically it's too far gone to try and fix. I can't see how adding fines or inspection fees to title will generate an urgency to deal with the building. And there are going to be legal costs to initiate court proceedings related to non-compliance. So let's say we do an inspection, we notice an issue, it doesn't get dealt with, we throw fees at them, we charge them. Eventually you're gonna have to initiate court proceedings, and that's going to be a legal cost associated with that. So taken to court, this is something we do want to try and emphasize, is that it's placed on the safety of the residents. And that is already regulated through property standards. So whether or not it's already being taken into account, maybe there's ways to try to improve the way we do it, I'm not sure. That's essentially the PowerPoint in a nutshell. What I'll do is I can actually bring up the reports to council. I'll transfer it back over to you, and I'll go through those quickly and then we'll take some comments. We'll deal with them. It's 2 separate issues. So the update to the property standards bylaw. This one, like I said, was passed in 2014. We did, in 2018, it was recommended, we had our former CAO provide the bylaw to our solicitor for review, and there was some items that they wanted to modify. It was, mostly the suggestions were on wording in a few areas, and they added some additional sections. There's, I think the administrative section was added in. There was a
They
few.
expanded basically a lot of the property standards committee, instead of in our other bylaw, it said, council must appoint a committee, property standards committee. He expanded all the duties, so just expanded a lot of, and the scope of the different areas. And I think it was all highlighted in the red or whatever. And there was an introduction with, at the beginning or whatever, which ours kind of didn't have, so it was a lot of housekeeping.
Yeah. So where we would have made a reference to a section in the building code, he would have just taken the section of the building code and put it into the bylaw, so it's just so there was a lot of that. The other thing that we did want to bring to council was that section 15.61 is of the building code actually we're supposed to establish a property standards committee. So we're supposed to have a property standards committee ready to go in case there is an appeal to a property standards order that's placed on a property. We don't currently have that in effect, and the reason we don't is the members had retired and we had a new council come in. So at this point, we're wanting to reestablish the property standards committee. I did get your feedback from the terms of reference, so I will make those modifications, but if there is any other modifications to the terms of reference or the bylaw itself that we want to talk about, we can do that. At this point, we're just tabling, we're not planning on passing anything tonight. It was just to bring it to council and start the process. So I'll leave. Yep.
Just so for the property standards, so exterior lighting, talks about all underground parking areas, so are you like on property like behind areas?
No. Underground parking is in some communities. We don't have any at this time, but it was included. The lawyer decided that was a good inclusion, so we weren't going to say, no, we're not listening. We included it.
Just one more, so terms of reference for property standards, I'm not sure what Stacy said, but just for selection, interest in participation in parks and recreation.
Yes, it was the wrong term. Yes, it was the template used for the, she called that one.
Our last property standards committee was made up of all of council members, as well as, I believe, the CAO. If you can't get interest from the public, that's the route that you can go. And that's spelled out in the act as well as the procedure for that and the duties of everybody. I believe I added an insert there for the responsibilities of the property standards committee.
Councillor Ivanov?
Ashley, I don't know if it's possible, but I'm thinking, if you had somebody that would work on this for, say, a 3-month period and went around town and looked at all the abandoned buildings in Kirkland Lake and and wrote everything down and come back. I know you guys are stressed. You have so much work to do, and I understand that. So I know it's not feasible for you to add that to your workload or add it to Victor's workload or anybody else's probably in that department. But if there was a student kicking around or somebody who had maybe some experience in that university, kid who thought they could get out and do that. And I just think, there's so many buildings in Kirkland Lake that are neglected and that are either empty or, and the buildings that have been, the taxes have been unpaid. I understand that's an issue and they don't get registered in time, and so it ends out, we keep them on the books longer and longer and longer, because when you finally do register them, it's that 2-year waiting period. If somebody could get at that, if they did one building every 3 days, that would be, 30 buildings by the end of the year, or 35 buildings by the end of the year. It would be, I understand somebody's gonna have to show them how to do it, and it's not a simple process, but is that potentially an option? There's summer's coming along, and there's probably kids out there that are just out of university now that might be looking for work.
Yeah, no matter which way we look at it, it's added costs to the budget. My concern with the registry, and this is something that depending on which way council wants to go with it, I haven't looked into this detail yet, but the registry itself, just identifying the vacant buildings or areas, whether there's any liability, so once you've said, okay, now I know that problem exists, if something happens and we're not doing inspections or we're not, whether there's any type of associated liability with doing that. That's, again, something I'll look into if council wants me to. I just, at this point, trying to present what I've done in terms of research with that vacant building bylaws.
Yeah, I find it difficult to believe that ignorance reduces your liability. I just, and that's what you're saying, is that if you're ignorant of it, then it's no longer, you're no longer liable. So, we could all be ignorant and just not do anything. And, but I would think there's got to be some sort of a solution to this, and to try and beautify the community a bit, and at least if we, if we register them, then, there's properties that may be salvageable if they're empty for 2 years, but are certainly not salvageable if they're empty for 10 years, and nobody's registered them, and then when somebody, then you've got to tear them down.
Yeah, and that's the tricky part. It's still somebody's property, even though you want to tear it down.
I'm assuming they didn't pay their taxes, Victor. If they haven't paid
Yeah,
taxes,
yeah,
and then,
yeah.
I know it's somebody's property, but then at least you start the process and you can go through and have it transferred to the community, or, I know that everything costs money, including that.
And
But,
then
I
it's
mean,
the
not doing it
taxpayers.
costs you money, because somewhere down the road it's gonna be abandoned, you have to tear it down anyway and spend 60 or 70 or 80,000 tearing it down, so.
And that's at the cost of the taxpayer when that happens too, so it's a council decision as they want to budget their, money for demolitions to do it that way. Because ultimately, that's how it's happened, in the years, if the owner themselves didn't want to tear it down. It's a difficult situation.
Or if they don't want the building and you get the waiver signed, and at least you can expedite that procedure,
and
you know?
that's
But I
what
mean,
we-
again, I know you guys are so busy, you haven't got time to do it, but I'm just thinking if there's somebody who had, just the time and that was their full-time duty for 3 months, 6 months, whatever, for the summer, a summer job for somebody, would that be feasible? I don't know if that's potentially feasible, but I just hate to see us do nothing and, just for me, okay, we're ignorant, so we're okay, we're not liable, but that's not an answer.
I think we do something to answer the question there. We do our process when it's brought to our attention, for sure. Now, if you took all of those properties and say there was, I'm not sure how many there is, but let's say there's 50 properties, would the town then be willing to demolish all 50 properties at whatever expense? And that would be the decisions that would have to be.
Or potentially a
made.
tax sale, some people might be interested, as you said, the neighbors might wanna buy a building because they want
And
to
that's the
expand their lot,
process,
and
yeah.
they'll buy it and tear it down themselves and spend whatever money it costs to tear it down, so they get an expanded lot. If we were to give it to them, it's probably better than leaving the building there, right?
And that's the process that we use, that we're using right now. Once they're registered, it does go to a tax sale, and then if it's not sold, then it's vested into the town.
It's just a very slow process.
Councillor White?
Okay, so first of all, it's not just on the CBO's shoulders. In other municipalities, the responsibilities can be shared by the bylaw enforcement, which we already pay for. Whether they do this job or not, it will not add to the tax burden there because we're paying them to do their job. Also, the fire department could be involved, like we heard last week. They were not interested, but with the KPMG, they could take over property standards. They could also take over a share of a vacant building registry. I've been working on this a very long time, so I respect Ashley greatly, but I don't think it's a balanced report. We've heard that it's going to cost the taxpayers too much to do it. I gave her 4 different ones. We don't have to take it word for word. We can pull what we need from the bylaw to help our municipality. So currently our property standards only has 4 things for abandoned or derelict buildings. Protect against risk or accidental danger, prevent entrance of unauthorized persons. All materials used for boarding up is covered with a suitable durable material which resists weatherings, and utilities are properly disconnected. That's the 4. With a variation of any of the vacant bylaws, this is what we'd be adding. We could ask that liability insurance remains on the property. We can ask floor plans be made available to the CBO and fire department. That's safety issues as well as structural issues. We can ask for a report of structural integrity. We can ask that all combustible material has been removed. We can protect the ask part of building from any further damage from the elements. We can ask that people do visual monitoring by the owner or a designate with a report to the CBO or bylaw officer or fire department monthly, biannually, whatever we want, twice a year, whatever we want. Posting of an emergency contact name and phone number for heaven forbid if something does happen to that property. It's our current property standards bylaw is missing proactive enforcement by town officials, because we can say that we will go out quarterly and with a checklist say no changes, no changes, no changes, or hey, the back of your building's falling off. it's time to do something about that. We can provide abandoned building owners with checklists of what our standards need to be and what needs to be followed. And we can provide the addresses, not the names, the contact numbers, to our protective services such as fire department and OPP. And it'll provide a little bit of accountability for property owners who allow properties to become abandoned and derelict. So we have approximately, I went out, took me about an hour and a half on the weekend, and I found 44. And I was very willy-nilly with it. It took me an hour and a half. I wasn't able to go to Harvey Kirkland because I don't know exactly where we stop and LaBelle starts, and I didn't go to Swastika. So, so I don't know. There might be 75. Yeah. So yeah. So yeah, so there are points that we can ask and points that we don't have to ask as part of it. So I think it needs to be deferred until we look into it a little bit further, especially for the cost, to get a cost analysis done on it and what we really require in Kirkland Lake.
Councillor Owens?
Yeah, first I want to thank Stacy for all the research she's done, also Ashley and Victor for coming and telling us more about what their situation is. I used to drive by these abandoned buildings and think they were just ugly. Until one day somebody said to me, you're a miner and you've got a job in the Kirkland Lake area, and you can choose where you live, and you drive through Kirkland Lake and you see all these abandoned, falling down buildings. Is that going to make you want to live in Kirkland Lake? And when I look at it from that perspective, it's a much more serious problem. Obviously, there's no easy answer, but doing nothing is definitely not the answer. I don't know the answer, and it's going to require more discussion. But I think Stacy has identified a problem that's not just a health and safety problem, it's also an economic problem. I remember when I moved here in 1982 and I drove through Chappie Hughes and I thought, oh my God, and then I drove downtown, there were cement walls beside me. And then when I drove around and I saw, like Taylor and Prospect and, that intersection, and I drove along Foss Lane, I said, holy geez, this is not a community that, if my job wasn't here, I wouldn't be moving here, right? So I think it's an important economic factor as well. But to sit here on our hands and say, well, there's a lot of difficulties, we just can't do anything, it is not the answer either.
Yeah, I don't want it to come across that I'm saying let's not do anything. I'm recognizing that there's going to be challenges with trying to implement this process. So it's how much do we want to spend is eventually what it's going to come down to.
Just one sec. To Stacy's point, from what I'm hearing here tonight, and that's not a reflection on you, Vic, or Ashley, but I don't think we know, the town knows how many derelict buildings we have. And you found 44 without really looking too hard, just driving around town.
It's 19
But-
streets.
Yeah.
44 on 19 streets.
But, and this council doesn't have a clue as to those numbers, it's probably quite a bit higher than Stacy's saying, that we have. And it's getting worse. The beautification of our town, it's pretty scary to get all these people coming here for the 100th anniversary and discouraging when they start driving around town. It's an economic issue, like Rick said, but we've got to find some way of working this out, and getting control of the property a hell of a lot quicker than we have been, I think is a good start. And getting a list, we don't even know the numbers that we have out there, but we've got to start someplace and working to solve this problem. Councillor Adams, sorry.
Yep, I certainly agree with Stacy. Even for manpower being identified, I think utilizing the fire department, because that was one of the recommendations from the fire master plan, was to help utilize them for enforcement. I think that could also be a benefit, but 44 houses, wow, that's 19th Street. So I think it's best to be proactive on this one as well. So if we do need more time to really get our eggs in the basket on this one, then that's what I'm in favor of.
We weren't passing this tonight, were we? Any further discussions or questions?
The thing is, vacant building would be a different bylaw. You can't combine that with property standards because it's not there. Oh, no, I know.
Sorry? The only thing I think that we just need to try and emphasize is the breakdowns of the various municipalities. And I did finally get a hold of London, so I'm gonna be able to talk with them tomorrow. But yeah, it's essentially, we recognize there's an issue. I can say that 2018 was probably our most proactive year yet. I don't know when the last time we've demolished buildings that weren't owned by us.
Not in my, see,
Yeah.
I wasn't at the, like, we had a staff before, of, no,
Back
but
in the
even
day.
special constables,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
had, by law enforcement, we had a CBO, we had a deputy CBO, so we had, more staff, that, whether it helped or not, or whatever, but there were more issues that we dealt with. Now it's a little bit harder, we still deal with the issues when they're presented, but sometimes it's just
Just,
harder to get through them.
yeah, just one suggestion, because we're not, obviously not gonna approve this tonight, but maybe going ahead with the committee and see what public response we get. I know there's counselors that are interested in being on that committee.
Can you do the property standards
my-
committee? That,
Yeah,
but
That's
that's
something
not, that's not their
that's an act
mandate, yeah.
requirement as well, it's,
yeah, but I think at least getting the committee formed, there's enough people that this is a real sore point, that we can move on that a little quicker. But I don't think we're ready for this bylaw.
Am I able to ask for some guidance, though? Like, if you're wanting me to bring something back, what exactly are you looking for? Because right now it's sort of a, do you want me to look at opportunities for?
I know what I put on the list.
Yeah, but it's,
see, is your, like, property standards is property standards, your vacant building would
it's
be a
completely
separate
separate.
Yeah.
bylaw, and you'd have to enact it under some type of a provincial approval,
Yeah.
whereas the building, or property standards is mandated or enacted
code.
from the Building Code Act. Community standards is a provincial statute.
Vacant was municipal act.
With short form wording, which the
Yeah.
province has entitled you to charge people for contraventions of whatever you've listed, and that's the list. Now, this one here, I'm really not too sure, it's kind of a bylaw that
Yeah,
the
there-
municipality has passed, but under what authority?
It's not,
Because if it does go to court,
it has to,
it has no binding,
bite to it.
because that's the tough part. And it's the legal thing, I'm not a lawyer, but you have to be careful. Does it have any merit or teeth
yeah,
if you're
when
going
it
to
goes to court.
go through? But just having a list of properties, that would be fine. I mean, it's when you want to enforce it using a legal system, that's where the challenges would be. But just having them a list, requiring them to register, I can see just the challenges that Ashley had mentioned is, we have a hard time communicating with people with some of these buildings, we don't know who they are, they don't wanna respond. Maybe hard to get them to register too, so I'm not sure if and how that could happen, but it will, the intent, you will get, you're not gonna get everybody, but maybe you'll get people registered, I don't know.
It's section,
Councillor White.
sorry.
And this is something new.
Yeah, it's,
has a vacant building bylaw.
Yep.
A few others that haven't.
Yeah, so I summarized wetlands, I think, in my report.
There's not anyone in, like, you know, to communicate, to say with my L'Oreal chapter, we meet a couple times a year for training and to discuss things within, our district, to see if we're on the same page, more so in the building code access when we're issuing permits and doing those type of inspections. But nobody has one of these things to be able to discuss it.
They refer to the fire prevention, and they refer to the building code act, so specify
Yeah.
bylaws, so maybe those might be intermingled in order to make this thing work.
Yeah, this one has, like, the majority of the places that I looked at, there was only one, I can't remember which one it was, they actually used the existing staff. The rest were all additional people dedicated towards it, and they were all bylaw enforcement related. It looks like they get their ability to pass this bylaw under the public nuisances. So like, whether or not, I know there's one that went to court, but the other ones have not gone to court over it. They just have people complying, which is fantastic. I wish that could be the case for everybody. I would like to maybe sit down and talk to them a bit more about the court process and how it has held up in court. I'm concerned about whether or not public nuisances and whether vacant building actually has some teeth with public nuisances in court. It'd be a question for our lawyers too, to a certain,
Councillor White?
So we're definitely not gonna save the 44 that I found. Those ones are well beyond, because they've sat, and we had nothing in place in the municipality to start the protection, you know? And we're not saying that we have to charge for it. It could be, hey, you're on the tax roll for this property, fill this form out. Yay, no charge, just send it back to us. You know, it could start off like that, so that we have something to prevent 3 years from now, 10 years from now, us having 150 abandoned buildings and derelict, not just abandoned, derelict buildings. That's the difference that we're gonna try to prevent. That's the only thing.
I think getting that inventory to start with and knowing what we have is a start to working towards fixing the problem. We don't know right now. That's a little scary. Councillor Owens.
Yeah, just to get back to a point that Eugene made about using a summer student. If I live on Allen Avenue, I get the town-owned grass in front of my house cut by the town. If I live on 3rd Street, I don't. So what I'm suggesting is, because as a council, we really don't know how many of these buildings we have. We don't know where they are. Why can't we reallocate one summer student to do this work for us, and then at least we know what we're dealing with? And like I say, as a ratepayer, I don't want town to cut my grass. I can do it myself, thank you very much. But I've never understood the rationale about why some people get the town-owned grass in front of their house cut and other people don't. So to me, I realize that's not the only thing that student would do, but we're not taking anything away because we're not giving it to every resident in town, so.
Yeah, if I could. First off, we'll make sure that nobody cuts your grass.
Yeah, that'll be fixed. That's fixed.
We aim to please. Just from listening to the conversation, I think part of the part of the frustration is just the sense that you can't do anything, you want to do something, what can you do, and you don't know what. First off is with the registry, what's the goal? I think it's a good goal to try to identify and engage the owners, because right now we're not doing that. If we try to contact them right away, it's a negative thing. So it sounds like that's what your first goal with the registry is, just to try to engage. It's to identify where these places are, engage with them. Vic's point, and the point that's been made a few times, a new person or someone to do stuff, I think Councillor Adams had made the reference to the fire and property standards combined role. We do need to be planning for Vic, and perhaps that is something that we could be looking at as a combined position. It will be difficult, I know that. But within that, avoid a summer student. You won't even have the learning curve time for it. But if this is thought out, then definitely you could do an intern. Perhaps looking at the communities that have these registries in place is a little bit ahead of us. There's other communities that have taken a more proactive role to go after people who are abandoning or leaving these things. I'm thinking Timmins, Mark Jensen, and the project that he did. I think that that might be something that would be a good first step. I would suggest that council, put your money where your mouth is and allocate a budget, fixed budget for demolitions, that as opposed to staff coming back and always trying to argue that point. It's not a dollar amount that staff wants to spend, it's a dollar amount that you're investing in your community. We had the community improvement plan conversations yesterday. Councillor Adams, Councillor Owen both raised the idea of could we use any incentives for within the residential area. I'll leave that until June 4th and for them to explain their points, but perhaps the idea of using the incentives to get people to clean up properties that are not abandoned is a very good idea. Perhaps doubling incentives or looking at something more aggressive, I don't say now, but it's something into the future, to encourage people to purchase and tear down these buildings will be something. Again, you're trying to use a carrot as well as a stick. In terms of some of the properties that are falling behind in terms of registration and tax sales, again, there's contracted services that we could look at and focus our efforts perhaps more in the administrative. So there are bits and pieces that I think we could bring forward as a bit of an action plan to get us to a point where we could actually decide, is a registry exactly what we want, but we can at least get to that. Consensus is around the table, do something. I think the difficulty for staff is, as Ashley said, tell me what to do. Let's go back to the drawing board and see what others in our area have done that's out of a slightly different level, but will get us to where you want to go. And we can bring that back. Sorry, Councilor.
Yeah, I do think you bring up a good point about encouraging people to buy abandoned buildings that we have registered and have taken over, whether it's the reduced tipping fees, whatever the case may be. Would it at least encourage people to not scare them off, worrying that they got to pay $5,000 or $10,000 or maybe that's high on tipping fees, but on a reduction in tipping fees to clean up those properties. But that's something we can look at in that community improvement plan. Yeah. Councillor Owen?
Yeah, just towards the community improvement plan, that is a living document, okay? So the initial, whatever we go with initially, it's a living document and we can change it at any time to meet what we feel the priorities of the community is. My question is, and I think it was answered but not directly, we're having a problem registering properties. Is that because we don't have the staff to do it, or is that because of a provincial backlog? Like, why is that bottleneck happening? Is it a staffing problem with the town?
I think you would say probably all of the above.
Yeah.
And I think it would be amiss to tell council that we sit here and we're going to fix this right away. Well, I think what we should be saying to council is there's others in the same boat. Let's find out what they've been doing and see what fits. We don't have the time or resources to try to dream our way out of it. We'll figure something out for that from others.
But there are outside sources that can do that work. Like we talked about this earlier, even if we hired them for a year to get the backlog caught up, would be a start. We have to get on top of this, so I agree. Any further discussion? So we're going to defer this until another date.
Sorry, from staff's perspective, could, Ashley, could you make an arrangement, not you,
Just want to comment on that. We already have a policy for reductions for demolitions. It's a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
thanks. Let's, reach out to some of those, squirrel?
Yeah, we're gonna reach out to Mark Jensen.
Okay, thank you.
We're gonna call some other municipalities that are in similar situations.
Okay,
Ideas.
can I talk? Oh, okay. The reason I want to say about Mark Jensen is we had also discussed him as a possible resource for council to talk to as well for the CIP, right, and how it was put in, so we can combine the two. That would be really good before he disappears fishing again. So if we could
Of course, no problem.
Vic and Ashley, thank you for a very informative discussion. We realize it's a lot more complicated than, at least I'll say for myself, than before we had this meeting tonight. So we know we have to work on it, and but I think we have a better distinguishing between property standards and vacant buildings. At one point, I thought we could put it all together. Obviously, that's not the case. That would be too simple.
Well, we're up to 28 now, so I mean, we're a little, last year was the best year we've ever had that I've,
This is gonna be the best year.
it's coming up, last year was
17.
2018. Pardon?
17 came to its court.
And FedEx,
Yeah, those were new builds we've never had,
FedEx.
even with the big boom when Kirkland Gold announced, 5 or 6 years ago of 600 units. We built, I think, 4 homes that year, or 6 total. I don't have it offhand, it's,
No, I was thinking the dollar value of the permits.
oh geez, yeah, we do have that.
Just,
we do have it, it's a monthly report, I don't have it in my head. I kind of remember it at the end of months, not
Yeah.
normally in the
In the
middle
middle,
of months.
yeah.
Because there's a running total and it's available to
yeah,
review.
no, I was just
At any time,
curiosity.
yeah, because I mean, that was part of the KPMG report, is to try to get the building department to be self-sustainable. You can't make money, that's not the intent, so if you do make money, it has to be deferred somewhere and used for the lean years. So there is, the Building Code Act is basically spelled out what you can and can't do.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, they already are kind of,
Anyway.
want them to amalgamate us. And we're their problem.
it's hard to do because we're quite large and we do quite a number, like I'm talking in the building perspective of how many permits we issue and the amount of work. We do quite a bit of work compared to, we go from our L'Oreal chapters right from Hearst to Mogilby, and we do quite a bit of work throughout the year now. Used to be just in the summer, it pretty well goes right through now.
Okay.
We're here for Konami to take over, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have to think, is it the bridge in where we go for lunch, or is it gonna be Smitty's?
Introduction, reading, and consideration of bylaws.
It's moved by Councillor Casey Owens, seconded by Councillor Rick Owen, that bylaw 19-048 being a bylaw to name members to committees of council with the addition of Tracy Barb to the Economic Development Committee and Tony Jensen to the Northern College Community Campus Committee, repealing bylaw 19-042, be read a first, second, and third time and acted and passed.
All in favor? Passed.
It's moved by Counselor Rick Owens, seconded by Counselor Casey Owens, that bylaw 19-049, being a bylaw to authorize mayor and clerk to execute a negotiated agreement with Stantec, be read a first, second, third time enacted and passed.
All in favor?
Passed.
Notice of motions? None declared. Confirmation bylaw?
It's moved by Counselor Rick Owens, seconded by Counselor Casey Owens, that bylaw 19-050, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held May 14th, 2019, be read a first, second, third time, enacted and passed.
All in favor? Passed.
Sorry. It's 8 o'clock.
Councilors' reports? Councilor Owen?
Yeah, I can't remember whether it was Saturday or Sunday now, but I was on Algonquin Avenue parked, and I saw these two kids about 9, 10 years old come along the street. They both had blue gloves on, and then I noticed that they had a bag, and each one of them had a bag, and they were going along picking up garbage that had accumulated in their neighborhood and putting it in their bags. And I was really impressed, and somehow it's very appropriate what we were talking about tonight, because here are the young people caring and taking pride in their neighborhood. They're and we have a lot of adults that aren't doing that. So I rolled down my window and I said thank you to them, but I just wanted to mention at council, and maybe it'll start a movement. No, I had a senior moment.
Any other comments? I attended Phenom in Sudbury for 3.5 days. There was a very unified message of concern with all the cutbacks and the different budget so far, and there was a resolution passed to request the Premier and the Finance Minister to hold off on these changes and have further discussion with the municipalities. I think the other thing, it was a good opportunity to network with the other Northern Ontario communities and find out that a lot of their problems are very similar to our own, and some ideas as to how they're approaching it. It was certainly a worthwhile meeting, and I hope some of the councillors get to attend in the next few years, because I've been there twice. It's well worth the event. Also, I attended the CWL Catholic Women's League District Convention. It's about 80 women. Got an earful. They're a great group. They do a lot of work for the community and the church, but in the community, they're a great asset to the town. Any other additional information? Adjournment?
Moved by Councillor Casey Owens, seconded by Councillor Rick Owen. The council adjourns to an in-camera meeting pursuant to Section 239(2) of the Municipal Act to discuss 2 issues related to potential litigations.
All in favor?
Passed.